Three, two, one.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Yountville Town Council meeting for Tuesday, January 5th, 2021. I'd like to welcome you all to the new year. Before we get into our roll call and our business for today, I'd like to remind everyone that this special meeting of the Town Council is being held pursuant to Government Code Section 54953 related to teleconferencing of meetings orders where certain sections of the Brown Act relating to teleconferencing present in his office. I am present in the council chambers. Vice Mayor Dorman, council members Moeller, Dornbecker, and Knight, along with staff, are participating remotely by video and audio in conformance with the governor's executive order. Members of the public have been able to submit comments by public comment at yville.com, and we do have some public comments that have been submitted. We will be referencing them at the appropriate time in the agenda. So now I'd like to ask our town clerk to conduct roll call and ask each member of the town council to confirm they are able to hear the proceedings and that they have a copy of the agenda for this meeting. Go ahead, Michelle.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Michelle. The YouTube feed is not coming through clearly again.
Okay.
Before we proceed, I thought I would let you know.
Thank you. So let me see what we can do with that. Let me go ahead and call roll and then I'll play with that, Mayor. Councilmember Dornbecker.
Here, and yes, I have everything.
Thank you. Councilmember Knight.
Here, thank you.
And can you say yes to the questions?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes to all. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Moeller.
Yes to both.
Vice Mayor Dorman.
Here, and yes to both questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mayor Dunbar.
Yes, I am here.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to work on the video.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and read the rest of our protocols while you work on that. As I referenced, members of the public were able to submit comments via email. And before we continue with the agenda, I would like to let our viewers know any vote taken during the regular items that have representatives that are not staff that are providing presentations will be welcome into the meeting at the appropriate time. So with that, we'll see if, Michelle, if we've fixed our broadcast glitch with YouTube. Still working on that?
I've restarted it and I'm asking people how it looks now.
He looks better now.
Okay.
Thank you. I can't see that part, so.
And
Yeah, it looks like it's been resolved. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, very good.
It looks good.
Yep. We have 3 confirmations that we're looking good again on YouTube. That's always a good thing. So please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. If you could find the closest flag and face that, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all very much. Next up is the adoption of today's agenda. I don't believe we have any changes. Is there a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
And a second?
I'll second.
A motion by Councilmember Dornbecker, second by Councilmember Moeller. Michelle, roll call vote, please.
Thank you. Councilmember Dornbecker.
Yes.
Councilmember Moeller.
Yes.
Councilmember Knight.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Dorman.
Yes.
Mayor Dunbar.
Yes,
Thank you.
that passes unanimously. We have no proclamations or recognitions today. Next is public comment for items not listed on the agenda. Michelle, did we get any submitted comments for this section?
No, we did not, Mayor. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Next up is our consent calendar. And we will take up all items unless any item needs to be pulled, items 7A through E. I will just state for the record that I will be abstaining from the vote on the February 4th minutes as I was not present at that due to travel to back in the days when we used to travel to a League of California Cities conference in Washington, D.C. And I believe Councilmember Knight will be abstaining from the minutes with maybe one exception since he was not yet on the council. Is that correct, Councilmember Knight?
I believe yes, I will abstain from all those that I was not on the council. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mayor, would you like a motion?
Yes, I would.
I'll make a motion that we approve the consent calendar.
I'll second. Sorry.
I will take the motion by Councilmember Moeller. I believe Vice Mayor Dorman had the second on that. That's to whom I will attribute it. So with that, and with the understanding, I'll be abstaining from item 7E for the February 4 minutes, and that Councilmember Knight is abstaining from the minutes. With that, a roll call vote, please.
Thank you. Councilmember Mueller,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Dorman,
Yes.
Councilmember Dornbecker,
Yes.
Councilmember Knight,
Yes, except for the items that I'm abstaining. Thank you.
thank you, and Mayor Dunbar.
Yes, with the
Yeah.
one exception of the February 4th minutes.
Thank you.
So those pass unanimously. Thank you very much.
You're
We
welcome.
have no other presentations on our agenda today, so we're going to get right to our public hearing, a use permit amendment request. Domaney Estates, discussion and possible direction regarding the application for a use permit amendment by Domaney Estates to increase employee count from 4 to 13 for the property located at 2080 Humboldt Street. If we can start with a staff report, please, before we open the public hearing.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. The application before you seeks to increase employee count for an office use at 2080 Humboldt Street, which is based on the staffing needs of the tenant Domaney and at the request of the property owner, Cindy Gates. And I'm going to start off by sharing some of the property history dating back to the rezone. The property is located in the residential scaled commercial zoning district, and that's a commercial district that allows different types of retail, office, personal service, and mixed uses. In 2014, the property was rezoned from Old Town Historic, which is a residential district, to allow the future redevelopment of a ground floor office and a second floor apartment in place of the then single family dwelling. In 2015, the property owner received design review approval for this mixed use project, consisting of 4 private offices downstairs and the apartment upstairs. For the office use, the applicant stated that the goal would be to either expand the Gates Estates office, rent to a third-party professional like an accountant, or to serve as an incubator space that rents individually to separate professionals. And each of these examples represents a low intensity office use, and it was anticipated that impacts to the surrounding residential neighborhoods would be minimal. It's important to note that the application was for design review. It didn't include a request for a conditional use permit, and that's because it was only for the major exterior changes to that former residential building that were needed in order to make it into a mixed-use structure. The future office use was only considered in general terms at that time, and that's because the design review application needed to demonstrate that the project would provide adequate parking, and it did that. Parking was calculated at the rate of 1 on-site space for every 300 square feet of office floor area, and that required a minimum of 5 spaces in the lot, which is what is provided. More detailed information on the office use was not provided because there wasn't a specific tenant at the time. Now, flash forward, in the spring of last year, Domaney moved into the building, and staff observed that there were 8 to 10 employee workstations. Each of the 3 separate offices was being used, and the conference room had been converted into a shared space with many desks. Staff reached out to Domaney and worked with them to better understand the use. And from the start, they sought approval for 8 employees. Staff expressed concern that the employee count was too intense based on on-site parking capacity, and that it exceeded what was envisioned at the time the property was rezoned for a low-intensity office use. Staff indicated that it could approve an administrative use permit for 4 employees based on this project history, but that the applicant chose to reduce employee count to 4, indicating that it had other properties to house employees. So staff of last year, staff received an email that Domaine was 8 employees and was utilizing the upstairs apartment as an office. And this ultimately resulted in a notice of violation that was issued to Domaine, directing them to reduce the employee count to 4, to discontinue using the upstairs apartment as an office space, and to consent to ongoing inspections to document compliance with the permit. And again, staff offered Domaine the option to pursue a conditional use permit from the town council, and this is the application before you this afternoon. Domaine is seeking approval to increase the employee count to 13 during regular office hours of 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday to Friday. All 13 employees would be present during periods throughout the day. However, there would be fewer employees at certain times, like beginning and end of day and at lunch. And 4 employees would park on site, and the remaining 9 employees would park on the street. Staff's main concern with this application is parking. And the applicant's project narrative calls attention to other businesses in the immediate vicinity where employees park on the street. However, it's really important to distinguish these as long-standing grandfathered uses. New projects are different. They're required to meet the parking standard that's in place when the project is approved. And that's a sticking point here. So based on the parking ordinance of the Yountville Municipal Code, a minimum of 6 spaces are required. That's 1 for the apartment and 5 for the office. And this is the minimum standard. However, the code provides a provision where more spaces can be required. When reviewing a conditional use permit, the council can require a greater number of parking spaces based on the specifics of a particular use, including the number of employees. And this provision has been triggered when employee parking demand is greater than the number of spaces that are accounted for by that base ratio of the 1 to 300 in this case. This increased parking requirement can most often be accommodated on site. However, there are examples where it's not feasible and it has been met off-site. In this case, there's no opportunity to add additional spaces to the on-site lot. Washington Street, the commercial district, doesn't have any on-street spaces for this stretch of the street, and Humboldt and Yount are both residential streets. And indeed, we've received comment letters from 2 neighbors, one on Humboldt and one on Yount, objecting to the increase based on concern that employee parking will result in impacts to that residential neighborhood. So one way that the town has devised to manage employee parking impacts is through the town's employee parking management program that was first created in 2015 around the time of the design review here for this project. And the program seeks to better manage employee parking impacts on the residential neighborhoods, and really specifically the Old Town Historic District that had seen the brunt of those impacts. Participation in the program is triggered when a business obtains a conditional use permit, and that's why it didn't apply to the administrative use permit, but it could be included as a condition of approval for this conditional use permit if it's granted. Now, the goal of the program is to require up to 100% of employees park in designated spaces on site to minimize the impacts. Here, about 30% of the employees can park on site. The remainder would be pushed to the right of way, which is really not in complete alignment with the goal of that program. However, there are instances where the town has approved off-site parking to meet a business's employee parking demand. RH is one of them. They're in the final stages of completing parking on the west side of Yountville Community Park, and that includes both employee parking as well as an equal number of public spaces. And then the former Protea utilized 1 space on Oakleaf Court in the cul-de-sac at the terminus of the street. And this off-site parking is accounted for in the master fee schedule, which provides a limited opportunity to park in the right of way for an annual fee of $1,700 approximately per vehicle. So here, as I've noted above, there's no parking on Washington, and Humboldt and Yount are both residential streets, as are all adjacent and nearby streets. So there really continues to be this concern for nuisance impacts of employee parking to the neighborhood, especially for the 9 spaces that are requested by the applicants. Although a fewer number may be warranted, and staff is seeking feedback from the council so that we can bring a resolution back before you at your next meeting, either to approve or deny this project. Thank you.
Before we open the public hearing, are there questions of the staff report? And I am looking for hands. Yes, Councilmember Knight, you're first.
Thank you. For staff, I noted in the report there was the applicant applied for a type 17 ABC license. I can also ask the applicant later, but is that license for office use or retail? Do you have information about what the purpose was for that application?
I'll allow the applicant to elaborate, but we did ask them about that at time of application. They had no intention of using this for retail or for wine tastings. That is the designation for an office use.
Okay, thank you. And I had just a general question. When we're looking at an RSC and office, our 300 square foot per parking space requirement, you noted in your staff report that there's just kind of balance between parking capacity and site intensity of use. Is our current assumption that the 1 space per 300 square feet is 1 person per car?
Yes, it is. And that is the minimum parking standard based on a standard office use. However, there are provisions of the code that allow that number to be adjusted upward or downward, and those spaces can be on-site or off-site.
Okay, that's all the questions I have for now. Thank you.
Okay, I think your audio was breaking up, but I believe you said you were finished with your questions for now.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm finished. Thank you.
Okay, Vice Mayor Dorman's next.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. And also, thank you, Director Listen, to you and your staff for answering questions prior to this meeting. I really appreciate it. So the administrative use permit was issued to the lessee, correct, to Domaney?
Yes, correct.
And the conditional use permit that you're asking us to look at or consider would also be issued to the lessee?
Well, it's a entitlement that would run with the land. So this current lessee would utilize it, but future tenants could utilize it as well, if they stepped into the shoes of Domaney and operated under the same terms, meaning same number of employees, same level of impact.
So Domaney says it's a negociant and doing only wine marketing business. If a group of accountants came in there, would the same number of employees, would they be limited to those same number of employees?
Yes.
Okay, so even though the use permit's going to a lessee, it will run with the land?
Yes. Well, because it
Okay.
goes to both the lessee and the property owner.
Okay, so they'll both be, all right, thank you. And I believe Domaney paid some fines and fees, is that correct?
Yes, they did.
Do you know a ballpark of the total, and whether, did we give them any deferral or break on a rate, or did they pay everything?
We issued $4,400 in fines, and we provided an opportunity to appeal the notice of violation. It wasn't appealed. And so those fines were due. There was, they continued to accrue over the period that they continued to use the space in violation of the administrative use permit. And it wasn't cleared until we conducted an inspection to determine that they had scaled back the downstairs occupancy and discontinued use of the upstairs apartment for office use.
And did they pay 100% of the fines and fees we imposed?
Yes.
Thank you.
Councilmember Dornbecker.
Thank you, and thank you for the report. Sandra, I noticed in the staff report that Demaney had not applied for a business license in the town of Yountville. Have they done so since then?
Yes, they remedied that violation immediately.
And also that the apartment on the second floor, has that been used as a domicile for anyone since I understand it has a rental amount of $1,000 a month? Is it being used as someone living there?
We don't believe so. We understand from the application that the tenant's attorney is the sublessee and that they intend on using it occasionally. We haven't seen any evidence that it has been used.
And if I could, because I was involved in the, well, Sandra was out, Daniel and I did the site review and inspection. Cindy Gates was also present at that point in time. And it was very clear that the property was not being used as a domicile, and no evidence has been provided by Demaney that they have rectified, or I should say returned to active, allowing it to be used as a residence.
And at this time, how many employees are working out of that office at this time?
They have reduced the employee count to 4, moved employees to other office spaces for now.
Thank you. That's all for now. Thank you.
Councilmember Moeller.
Thank you, Sandra, for the report. And I have a question about one of the attachments to the staff report. I noticed that the sublease agreement was attached and it included the rent in there. Is there a reason that the main lease, which is referred to both in Ms. Gates and Demaney's narrative, do we have a copy of that lease?
We don't know.
Okay, was there any reason we didn't have that? Because we had a sublease, it just seems awkward.
Well, the sublease was important because we wanted to understand the relationship between the parties, since they were separate uses, one commercial, one residential. We didn't feel it was necessary to obtain the original master lease.
Okay, so I can ask questions about that when we open the public hearing. Thank you.
Councilmember Knight, you have additional questions before my questions?
Yes, thank you. I apologize. I'm trying to get used to this open government and my notes in it. So for staff, I had a question. In the staff report, you talk about the town council, in order to approve a use permit amendment, we need to make all the findings for the general use permit findings and RSC findings. And so my question is, I guess, is that an all or nothing? Can the council make a defensible finding that 13 employees is too many, but they could make a finding for a smaller number that's more than the current use permit of like 5 or 6, or is that defensible?
Yes, so if you believe that 13 is too high and you cannot make one of the findings, that the resolution would fail. However, if the council as a consensus felt there was a smaller number that would work and you could make the findings for each of those, that would be defensible, yes.
Okay. And just one other question. I appreciate it. Thank you. And then, and in your staff report, you make a reference to considering pulling the rental agreement out from the regular lease and reviewing it on a more regular basis. And so I just had a question that there's a current lease in place for a year now, according to your report. It started September 1st. Do we have the ability as a part of a use permit or a change to change the nature of a current legal rental lease?
Happy to jump in on that one, Councilmember. Not directly, but you do have the ability to add conditions to the use permit that can require certain things such as regular occupancy or some other thing that the council's concerned about for that apartment building. But you're right to point out the issue of actually interfering with the current contractual relationship, but you can include conditions that get you to where you want to go. And like all conditions in a use permit, it's up to the applicant to decide whether or not to accept the use that's been granted. And at that moment, they also must comply with the conditions you've included. That's a voluntary act that the applicant does after the council approves the use permit. And so as long as the conditions are in there, that then becomes a decision for the applicant.
Okay, thank you.
So I'll ask a couple questions and then we'll go to the public, open the public hearing. Sandra, did I hear you correctly? You said $1,700 per vehicle for off-site parking is kind of a standard we have used elsewhere?
Yes, that's the current amount in the master fee schedule. Not exact, but close to it.
All right, approximately. And the use of RH as an example of off-site parking, can you evaluate whether that's relevant or not? It's obvious that it's not impacting residential street. It's still in the commercial and park area, but how would you use that as a comparison? I know you said the Protea situation also had one off-site parking that was permitted on a residential street.
I would view all three of those cases as very separate and different by looking at the specific facts. With RH, they developed the site and they obtained their use permit based on their idea of what the operation would be like at time of application. They received approval, things changed over time, and they had to remedy those violations. In this case, there is not approval to operate for more than 4 employees, and so they're seeking approval at this stage. So that alone sets them apart. With Protea, I think it was looked at as a hardship issue, and the one space was considered reasonable.
Okay.
More spaces or a greater number would probably not have received the same level of approval.
A request for more than one, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Right. And Sandra, I believe also in the case of Protea, the majority of their parking need was met on site, and it was only the one space that was needed, as opposed to the current case where actually the majority would be off-site.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. And then the other note I wrote down here, well, I have a few more. One space per 300 square feet of parking. Is it 6 tandem spaces, including one ADA specific space? Is it correct to say 6 total?
6 total, one of which is the ADA accessible, one of which is the apartment space, and the remaining 4 for the commercial or for the office use.
So the on-site fully satisfies the 4 employees. Would it satisfy any additional employees based on our standard of 1 space per 300 square feet?
Well, that number is an approximation of the number of employees and visitors to the site. It's a number that is accurate based on intensity of use, but those numbers can be completely thrown out of whack with higher employee counts. So it doesn't always capture the demand. And that's why the council approved a municipal code amendment to allow an increase or decrease to those numbers based on specifics. And what this town has done over the years is look at the number of employees and endeavor to park those employees on site.
And so I think what I'm hearing you say is the difference is there may have been an assumption made that 1 per 300 square feet is assuming it's 1 person occupying that 300 square feet, not 3 desks in 300 square feet. Is that
Yes,
accurate?
good way of putting it. Thank you.
Okay. So a couple other notes I have, and I'm sorry if these were covered by other questions. I was having a computer meltdown during some of the Q&A. So I may be repeating questions here, but I have a note about the attorney for the leasee claims that they were permitted by the landlord to have up to 13 employees, but I understand the landlord says that is not the case. Do we have clarity on who is being accurate and who is not being accurate?
No, we don't. Those were outside communications that did not involve this office.
Okay. And I know that the residential unit being partially used by I would say an employee for temporary housing, as stated by the letter from the law firm, basically says the attorney wants to use it when they come to town and don't want to go home to Pope Valley. Regardless of whether that was the intention of the residential unit, which I would argue is not the case, the fact that they're being charged rent may qualify that as a legal use. Is that correct, either Sandra or Gary?
Yes, and there wasn't a condition imposed on the project that it had to be a long-term lease, simply that it had to be a residential unit. And we have seen examples of where these mixed-use apartments serve as a pied-à-terre for someone's main residence, or as an alternative to it.
And so if we were even saying we were encouraging it to be a below market rate, the fact that it's $1,000 a month would potentially, again, I guess depends on who you ask, if that's below market rate or market rate, but I don't know that that was a firm condition for that residential unit anyway.
No, and it doesn't satisfy the town's affordable housing requirement because the tenant hasn't been income qualified. We don't know if they could be qualified. The fact that the rent is low doesn't make it an affordable unit.
But was it required to be an affordable unit?
No.
Okay, that's what I wanted to clarify. The other notes I had, I think, are more comments than questions. One last question. In the staff report, there's reference to design review application calls for what I have down here as quoted. Downstairs office with 4 private offices and an upstairs apartment. Could you explain if that's correct in the design review application, where is the legal binding of that downstairs office with 4 private offices? And again, this is a Sandra and or a Gary question. I think the expectation is a private office means 1 person in that office, but is that true?
I think that that was the assumption that was made based on how the project was presented at that time. It was a design review application, so we're looking at the structure, but we're looking at uses in terms of parking and other amenities on site. So I would say there were assumptions that came into play, not just based on the 4 individual private offices, but on who the potential tenants might be, and the understanding that there would be a lower employee count. And I will turn to Gary for more of the legal implications of that.
Yeah, I would add, based on the conditions, that there appears to be some leeway there, and whether it's for single or for multiple, and that more specific conditions could spell it out.
Okay, and again, this is for either of you, because the part of Humboldt Street that is being impacted here, both by the building in question and across the street where we have allowed a rezoning of those parcels, how does that play into this, if it does at all?
how does the parcel across the street play into it? Is that the question?
The fact that this used to be a residential parcel, it's now a mixed-use parcel. Across the street used to be residential, is now part of that as well. So there is commercial activity permitted on this street. This street used to be entirely residential. It's now, I will say, roughly half residential and half non-residential. Does that factor into the analysis?
So yes. So this is a transitional zone. There's no question about that. Throughout town where there is that transition, there tend to be greater impacts. And so that is why when projects are approved in that close proximity and on the east side of the street, that lower intensity uses are permitted and higher intensity are prohibited. Restaurants are prohibited. In the case of the parcel across the street, wine tasting rooms are prohibited. But I guess it is important to note that when that future project comes forward across the street, it'll be a brand new project. It will be evaluated in terms of design review and use permit since it's from the ground up, and we'll have to comply with the parking standard for those uses.
And what we have conceptually approved is all anticipated parking being handled on site on that parcel, or a combination of on-site and public street?
It's anticipated that parking will be on site. We'll know more of the specifics as to employee count when a project comes forward.
Okay. I think that's it for the questions for now. Yes, Councilmember Dornbecker, another question?
Thank you. Yes, I do have one question that I realize that we did not designate that that one bedroom apartment as affordable housing, but since it is under market rate, can we make make that something as part of this, that it has to be an affordable unit, since it is under market rate, as it, you know, and they're charging under market rate?
Sandra,
Gary?
Yeah, so I believe so. You could include that as a condition today. Sandra, do you have any thoughts on that as well?
I am uncertain as to the answer there, since it's approved as the way it is. It seems as if there would have to be some trade-off to require that to be affordable. But if Gary doesn't say so, then I turn to Gary for the answer.
So, but according to Gary, it could become a condition.
I think so. I think the question that Sandra's raising is that this is an apartment and it's not a house. And so there are slightly different requirements for how you go through that. And so I think what Sandra, what you're referencing is typically an agreement between the apartment owner and the town for doing it. You could add a condition in that lays the groundwork for that type of agreement. I think there's a couple different ways to approach it.
Thank you.
And to follow up on that, the parking requirement doesn't change whether it's an affordable, deed restricted, or a market rate apartment, correct, Sandra?
No.
Okay. Okay, I believe that's all the questions that we have from the council for now. I'll go ahead and open the public hearing. We'll start with the applicant. I know that we have at least 3 public comments that have been received on this item, which we'll hear after we hear from the applicant. Go ahead, Cindy.
Hi. I think that what I've kind of come up with through this whole thing and listening to all of your questions and whatnot, I know you've read my letter that I sent you. Should I read that back?
No, that's okay. We've all been given it and had a chance to review it.
Okay. From what I'm hearing, it sounds to me like it might be more equitable to have a lower amount of tenants allowed in that office space downstairs. The tenants there have offered to ride together. A few of them can put, carpool in. And that's been told to me by our current tenant. The current tenant is the one that rented out that unit above separately, and that was not my idea. I rented the whole building to them, thinking that one of the owners, was an out-of-town owner, and he was going to be using that when he came to town to work. And that's how we had talked. So of course, I didn't spend all the money on that building to only house 4 people and to use that apartment, which I did high end, as affordable housing. So what I would propose is I would turn around and talk to this tenant and lease out. I do have a property management company as well. So I could lease out that apartment separately to a local or whatever at the rate that it's worth, not $1,000. I know that they're giving their attorney a deal, but that's not part of what we had agreed on. I don't know what your feedback on that would be, but the other thing I'm willing to do is rent or pay the parking space fee for a couple or a few spaces a year, if that helps. I just think that the building is so big, and I could have made 4 separate offices plus the big conference room, but it was so pretty to leave the 4th office open that that's what I chose to do. Instead of enclose the 4th office, I left it open so you have one huge great room to work in. And I thought that would open it up for different types of tenants. So if need be, I could put another wall up and enclose it into a 4 office building with a conference room as well downstairs. If that helps at all, I don't know.
Is that all that you have at this point? We may have questions for you, but just wanted to give you a chance to present. And yes, we did get your narrative. And so we do have that background as well.
Okay. Okay. So I'm just trying to submit some offers or some ideas to help us. I just want to get along with everybody, and it wasn't my idea to do what they've done. I was unaware that they had a conference room upstairs. I just didn't check on them. The other thing is, when I built the building and I created the floor plan I created that was approved, I was totally unaware I was only allowed to have 4 people in that office building. It certainly isn't cost effective if that's all I could have. No one ever told me from the beginning. My use permit does not state only 4 people. So we told them they could have multiple people in there, but we thought that was okay downstairs. So I was a little confused with that as well.
Okay, so I'll ask Sandra to give some clarifications there, because I suspect that's going to lead to some other questions from the council. Sandra, could you clarify specifically what was permitted for the building? I'm looking at a floor plan that has 4 designated offices with walls and a conference room that is separate. And what I'm hearing the applicant, Cindy, say is there is space downstairs that is not segmented by walls the same way the floor plan is, because she chose to leave it all open. And I want to get clarity on that. I have not been in the building, and so I need clarity on what is the permitted and what is the actual condition.
I've given you pictures.
Yes, I know. I know what, but my point is the floor plan distinctly shows walls in the downstairs. It segments into 4 office spaces, and the pictures show many more tables and chairs set up per square footage. It's really not very clear how many. Anyway, Sandra, could you clarify what was permitted?
Yes. So at the time of the design review approval, it was for the 4 private offices and the conference room to the furthest west part of the building. During construction or during building permit issuance, The applicant elected to eliminate the private office that was furthest west to enlarge that common conference room space. And that wasn't a concern from planning because it didn't modify any use. That was simply for part of the design review. It didn't require that wall be there. Then when it comes to use permit, there are certain uses that are listed as permitted in the municipal code, and those uses are allowed outright. And then there are those that require a use permit. Not all uses are listed, and so there's a provision that allows the council to consider a use in either one of those categories based on how similar they are to other uses. So based on the design review approval, staff came to the conclusion that that could support 4 employees, and that anything greater would be a use permit by the council. A use permit, or let me clarify, prior to issuance of the administrative use permit, there wasn't a use permit on this property indicating the number of employees that were permitted.
Okay, I'm not sure that clarifies or confuses. So fine, yeah, Councilmember Moeller, you have a question?
Yes, so I am also very confused. It seems like we've got a couple different versions of the story here. So my question to staff is, did you explain during design review and approval with the applicant that the history of the site was that the original FAR was 0.7, and this was a prior use that was not, what's the word I'm looking for? It was not conventional use. Then, since it was rezoned to RSC, the FAR decreased to 0.4. However, because of the addition of the parking on site, the FAR was allowed to increase to 0.54. Was that explained to the applicant during design review?
I can't say, I was on maternity leave at the time, but in looking at the records that were taken to council, that was clearly explained in the staff reports. They were clearly granted a very special bonus to maintain that higher FAR for a remodel of an existing structure rather than starting on a vacant parcel.
Non-conforming, that was the word that was
legal non-conforming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, all right. That's that's what I recall looking back at previous staff reports too. So thanks for that explanation. So that's all for now. I will have more.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Dorman.
Thank you. My questions are for the applicant, and maybe I'm early on that.
No, go ahead.
Thank you. Ms. Gates, thank you for coming tonight. I was also hoping to see your lessee because I had some questions specifically pointed to them. And I'm just going to ask you a couple of them, kind of do you know questions. Do you know why they were, why they breached the administrative permit, why they had a permit for 4 and put 8 people in there?
No, I was unaware that they had signed that agreement with the town that they had.
Okay. And have they shared with you why they need 13 employees? What
their
those
business
people
is
will
growing
be doing?
so fast, is what they told me.
Okay, thank you. And I think there's some dispute about whether you told them there could be 13 employees, and my understanding is that you certainly did not tell them that.
Well, the thing that I found out, which I wasn't aware of, was that it was advertised by Vintage Property Rentals in an ad that they found that said they could have up to 13 people, that it could accommodate that. But they never said to me that they would need 13 people. I thought there was going to be about 8.
And so Vintage Property Rentals, did you hire them to do your marketing of the property?
I did. Mm-hmm.
And they didn't check with you before that ad went out?
Well, no. I think that what they figured was they Each office I had designed to take or to accommodate 2 or 3 desks. Because if I chose to use that as an extension of my real estate company, I usually have sales teams of 2 people and 1 assistant. So I designed the building to accommodate that. So I figured 3 a room would put 9 easily in the offices easily. And then in the great room there, you could have, half a dozen desks very easily, and then a receptionist desk right as you walk in the front door. So it was designed to hold that many people and still be a distance away from each other so you could talk on the phone, which now social distancing is important. So that still works.
Okay, and then you, in your narrative to us today, you talk about the economic necessity, which you've touched on. Is this economic, is it occasioned by the pandemic, or is it simply a general thought that when you built the building, you needed to be able to lease it for someone with more than 4 people on site?
Well, the pandemic thing, the situation we're in now, of course, if I lose this tenant, yeah, I think it's going to be a long period of time where I can lease this property again. I think everybody's so used to working at home that this will definitely damage me to an incredible degree. And as it was hard to rent to begin with for months and months because we got so delayed in construction with lots of things going on during that period of time, the little challenges we had. So my thought was, if we could get some agreement here that was equitable between me and the town, I would go to my tenants and see if they wouldn't agree, or I'd have to let them go. I let them out of their lease and try and rent it out to somebody else. But they agreed about people that we would be able to rent it to. I'm hoping that you can see where I can easily accommodate as many people as I've requested, and that's as many people as they are needing right now. But if we can't, and it's got to be a little bit less, and then we have to get along, or I have to buy some parking, I'm willing to do that. I want to do what makes everybody happy, and I don't want to impact the neighborhood negatively. I haven't for years with my real estate company, and I had nowhere to park right next door.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for your answers.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just clarify for historical purposes, we chose to not put a park or a bus stop in front of your real estate office to give you parking right in front of your business there years ago. That's street parking, not required to be on site, because your building is one of those that historically was built with 0 parking on site, and that was allowed 20 years ago, 25 years ago.
Right.
And we're trying to accommodate those decisions today.
Thank you.
So, Councilmember Moeller.
Yes, I have, I'll start with another question for Sandra. I'm still confused, but I did go back and research all the other staff reports on this matter. So I'm still confused about the discussion we're having about the expectation about how many employees would be in the building, hence the number of parking places and the parking place for the apartment, and what the owner is stating in terms of her expectations about that. It seems, can you one more time trying to clarify that disconnect?
I think that there was definitely some ambiguity there as to what was to be allowed for a use in the future. I think it was looked at in terms of what are the base standards in the code for an office and an apartment, and it met that standard. But that's not the only consideration when you're looking at a use to fill the space, because you look at the number of employees. And I think that probably may not have been conveyed to this applicant. that there were assumptions both on the town's behalf and on her behalf. So I think that there is certainly some confusion there. There's a base number and the project met that at time of rezone and design review. Now we're talking about use, and the question is whether it meets the standard now. And it can be a different question based, or a different answer based on, since those were different questions.
Okay, so the follow-up to that, and more specifically regarding parking, we did change our Yountville Municipal Code. I've been on the ad hoc parking committee for quite a while because we've been dealing with this issue for quite a while. What does the Yountville, when was that change in the code concluded? Codified, I suppose, is the legal word for that.
So the standard of 1 to 300 was in the code at the time of the rezone and design review. Sometime thereafter, we amended the code to allow an increase or a decrease based on the specifics of the use. And that's where you see that come into play.
Okay, I remember that discussion. Okay, and then one last question for Cindy. You did provide the sublease for the apartment, and also in your narrative and in your oral commentary, you talked about economic hardship. What are you currently renting the office space for?
I'm renting the whole building for $9,000 a month.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like Councilmember Knight.
Thank you. The question for Ms. Gates. Hello, Cindy. My question for you is in the staff report, they said that the applicant applied for a type 17 ABC license, and there wasn't clarity of whether it was for retail or office, and the applicant said it was just for office. Are you, I guess would have been a question I might have asked your leasee if they were here, is that type 17 ABC license strictly for administrative work around alcohol, or is it allow them to do retail?
I didn't know that they were going to put that up on the building. In fact, I think it was Steve that called me and told me it was up there. So I went and asked them what they were doing. And they said that they needed that just to even do their paperwork regarding wine. So that's why they were putting their application in for a wine permit.
I think that's, I think, Cindy, that's correct. And it conveyed a curious question to us because several potential tenants that were looking at the space prior to Domaney had actually come to the town, met with town staff, and evaluated what they were intending to use and whether that would be supported. And this particular location has a specific, they can't do retail. So that stopped a lot of people's interest because there were people that thought they would do wine tasting, and wine tasting was strictly prohibited. And in fact, Sandra, I think because we saw wine bottles in their facility, we actually have that as one of the conditions in their administrative use permit. I also want to point out that we met, Sandra and I, and we talked with the Domaney representatives, went through, and as the property owner, Cindy was copied on the administrative use permit that was ultimately approved. And as you know, in the current history, it turned out that they pretty blatantly, directly chose to violate the use permit, which was negotiated with the town, which they participated in with legal representation.
Thank you, Steve. I have another question, if that's, if I could just move forward. So for Cindy, so I guess that was a question maybe following up with what Steve mentioned, is that after the town, your leasee moved in, the tenant had a conversation with them. They initially were going to request a use permit for 8, and then in a conversation with the town, they accepted a use permit with 4 individuals. And now they they feel or claim they need 13 individuals. Are you aware of why they accepted a use permit for just 4 employees if they knew at the time that that wouldn't be sufficient for their work?
I know that they had told me that their business was really growing and that they were going to be needing a lot of space. And when they first leased the building from me, he said, well, I may only lease it for 2 years because I might need a bigger place. And I said, oh, okay. But then they went and discussed the 4 employees there with you without my knowledge. I wasn't part of that whole conversation. I later found out about that when Sandra made me aware, and she gave me a copy of that later. But I had no knowledge of that to begin with, or at the time they signed that.
Thank you.
Other questions from council of the applicant? I'll just ask a couple. Cindy, you've been around a long time. You probably remember when another business, Masonry, used a residential property across the street from its business and had about 16 employees in there illegally. Are you familiar with that?
You know, I've been around a long time, right? But Masonry, I didn't know what they were doing over there. Over on Yount?
No, across.
No, it's on Washington.
Oh, down at the other end. I'm thinking of the other building. Okay, down at the other. No.
I bring you up the example
They did
because it was another example of somebody completely violating the conditions of use of a building, and they also claimed they didn't know the rules, which turned out not to be true in that case anyway. You know, it feels, you know, it's a bit surprising to hear when you're saying you had no idea what was going on in this building that's literally next door to your real estate business. I realize that you sold that, but your reputation is not one for not knowing what's going on in your properties, is what I'm getting at.
No,
and it surprises me that there is such a disconnect between what's going on and what you say that you believed was being permitted there, including the apartment that clearly when that building was built, you knew very personally and distinctly that that was an old residential house.
Yes.
That, you know, you lobbied to keep it years ago when Heston was being considered for construction, and you knew that it was critical to us that that be a rental apartment, and yet it certainly is surprising that there isn't better clarity on what the conditions were that were told to any tenant that would be coming in under your management. And so you can imagine that that leaves me with some, you know, not only confusion, but some questions about, you were being told 2 very distinctly different stories, and that's disturbing in and of itself. And that's from an operational standpoint. Example that we could cite in Yountville where we would have permitted up to 13 office desks and employees operating what is basically a call center in a building of even of this size. I know you call this a huge building, but not for Yountville. So I'm just trying to get clarity on, I know you wanted to do it differently, the floor plan, and you saw potential there, but at what point did you check with the town to see if building out spaces that could accommodate up to 13, you said just a few minutes ago that you figured you could handle 13 no problem.
Right.
Did you come to the town and ask before this happened? Because it seems convenient that your tenant is looking to have the same number of people that you think maxes out that space.
I know. No, I didn't go to the town and ask. I didn't think much of it, actually, because number one, I didn't realize I had that many people because their parking lot was never full. That's what I noticed. I saw people walking in and out, but I didn't really think much of it. And I can't see the back of who's walking up and down the stairs upstairs. And I'm not in town all night to see if there's a car there all night. So it just never occurred to me, and I didn't think about it. Maybe I just get too busy, and I just didn't. Now, if I would have seen that parking lot stuffed all the time and cars parked all over the driveway or I would have, of course, noticed. But it was never like that. It was never like that.
So also, given that your business for many, many years was right next door to this, and you knew, because I know where you parked and where Tom would park and others would park. And as I said earlier, we did preserve parking spaces in front of your business, I believe at your request, so that your clients would have somewhere they could park and come into the business. And we accommodated that rather than using it as a midtown bus stop.
Right.
But you've also been very aware that Humboldt has been heavily parked even before you rented that building, correct?
Right.
Okay.
And the other thing,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. The other thing is, I really appreciated you not making that a bus stop, but I have to get up really early in the morning and park there to beat out all the people that park there from Keller's right down the street. They're there at 8 o'clock in the morning, and they're there all day. So,
right, and so the point I was getting at, maybe too slowly, was you know that there is already a fairly high impact on the parking right there, yet you feel like 13 people in that building with 5 commercial parking spaces would be okay. That's what I'm hearing you tell us.
If they would carpool a little bit and park in other parts of town, that's why I offered you even pay for that. Somebody had told me that I think it was Steve, I'm not sure, Steve, that you were considering making that a one-way street and making the cars all park at an angle so that you could accommodate more cars on that street, because of if it were to be a one-way street, we could accommodate that. I don't know if on both sides of the street, but we were talking about one side of the street, and that would be the opposite side of the street of me. It'd be in front of the new pharmaceutical building, or whatever it's going to be, or their ice cream parlor as well, I think, in their pharmacy. So I thought that was down the road.
We can't draw conclusions based on supposition of what might happen in the future. We have to deal with current conditions. So frankly, it doesn't matter if that's even been discussed. If it's not in existence today, we can't assume something's going to change in some number of years.
Okay.
Okay, I think I'll stop with my questions. I know we do have some public comments that Michelle's going to read into the record, and then we'll continue. After that, we'll check to make sure there aren't any new public comments that have come in, close the hearing, and have further discussion by the council. So Michelle, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mayor. The first public comment is from Roberta Boris, first submitted on December 20th, and then a correction submitted on December 29th. So I'll just read the correction. 2 days ago, I sent a comment about the above matter. Please disregard that comment, as I was unaware the increase in employee count was only 2 person. I am in favor of granting that increase. Roberta Boris. The second.
And actually, Michelle, I think you need to read the initial email, because it has a very different, there is a very different opinion presented with the 13 employee count.
Okay, I'll go ahead and read the original email, December 27th, from Roberta Boris. To the Town Council and ZDRB, I object to the proposed change in the use permit for 2080 Humboldt Street, APN 036061013, that would allow the Domaney Estates office to increase their employee count to a maximum of 13 employees. My house is on Humboldt Street. We already have a huge parking problem due to the proximity of downtown. This business does have a small parking lot, but it is not adequate for 13 employees. My objection to this change is because it would further increase parking issues on our street. Roberta Boris.
Thank you. And I just wanted to make sure that both of those statements were in the record, because there also still is some lack of clarity on how many employees are even being requested or might impact. So thank you. Since both were submitted separately, I wanted those both on the record.
For
Go ahead,
full
Michelle.
context. I understand. Thank you. The next public comment was submitted by Kay Lafranconi and Cynthia Capchion. Dear Mayor, Vice Mayor, and council members, we are writing to oppose the expansion of Domaney Estates' permitted number of employees from 4 to 13 for the following reasons. Parking. Reliance on street parking would directly impact us. Our home is in Old Town Historic, a block away from the Domaney property. We and our neighbors already contend with employees of various businesses parking all day and sometimes all night in front of our homes. Domaney acted in bad faith by not obtaining a business license. Domaney acted in bad faith by agreeing in June to a maximum of 4 employees, but by August they were using the building to accommodate at least 8 employees and using the apartment as an office. And 4, replacing housing. The town's housing element requires replacement housing when housing is lost upon the reclassification of a parcel from residential to commercial. The use of the apartment as an office or conference room essentially removes a housing unit from the town's already deficient housing supply. Thank you, Kay Lafranconi and Cynthia Capchion. And then the final public comment was submitted by Pam Reeves, and that's Mayor and council member. I do not think that you can approve this application because I do not think you can make all the findings required. This property is not located on Washington Street. It is located deeper into a residential street. When the property was originally approved to be rezoned as residential scaled commercial, I am sure that the location was taken into consideration in the discussion of intensity of use and parking. I do not think you can make any finding in section 17.156.020 B, or C, in parentheses, particularly C2. Intensification of use, more people and more cars, will adversely affect the residents on Humboldt Street. Rezoning that particular property was a stretch for the intent of the residential scaled commercial zone, since in no way does it face or is it really visible from Washington Street. It is, however, very visible and very noticeable to the residents of Humboldt Street. Allowing an increase of intensity of use at this property and allowing excess parking to occur on the public right-of-way increases the negative impacts that this building has on the residential quality of that street. When the property owner presented the plans for the property, one would assume that they had crunched the numbers on occupancy. At that time, the owner was content with the current maximums and parking requirements. The market changes for everyone, and the possibility of those changes should have been addressed in the original proposal. Now the property owner and the tenant are asking for special dispensation regarding the intensity of use. If the original rezone and development plan was based on the highest and best use of the property at the intensity dictated by the parking restriction, then I think the council should not consider an increase without very good and most extraordinary circumstance. The tenant and property owner have not demonstrated good faith, nor have they demonstrated a commitment to abide by the rules of the community. This does not engender any trust or reason worthy of stretching, tweaking, or violating the current regulations regarding this property. If by some stretch of the imagination you choose to grant some increase of intensity, it should be predicated on the requirement of the property owner to provide the town with something we actually need. In parens, section 17.52.040C, the residents on the property should be placed into the town's affordable housing stock. Providing an additional unit as low or lower income housing would actually make the whole rezoning of the property make sense. As it is now, the town and its residents get nothing from any changes currently requested or historic. Again, that was submitted by Pam Reeves, and that does conclude the public comments. And Pam Reeves has submitted a second one now since the reading started. And it says, given the amount of total rent for the building, I do not see that there is a financial hardship if the owner rents the 4 offices, in parentheses, with access to a common conference room and amenities for $2,000 each, which seem, in parentheses, which seems reasonable, and the apartment for $1,000. She would get the same amount, if not more, if she charged more for the apartment. The use of financial difficulties as an excuse does not seem to hold water, given what commercial square foot rates are. I hope that the council will not accommodate this amendment request. Pam Reeves.
And is that the only additional public comment submitted?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So that is all of our public comment. I'm going to close the public hearing and invite discussion by the council. I'll also invite any council member that would like to begin that discussion to please raise your hand, virtual hand, or I will call on people. Councilmember Moeller.
Thank you, Mayor. I think this has been a very, I guess we'll say, interesting conversation. Tried to ask as many questions as I can to get as much clarity, but I definitely rely on my previous participation and current review of our previous staff reports on this item, and it seems quite clear to me that there was an increase in FAR that was allowed over what's allowed in the residential scale commercial, you know, due to the parking, due to the number of parking places needed for the space. So I rely quite a bit on that. And in reviewing the findings, I would say that I definitely cannot make finding A and B because strictly because of this intensification of use that's being requested from 4 to 13. It is just an undue burden on our neighborhoods. We spent a lot of time hearing complaints and seeing the effects on our residents of some of the parking that we have not controlled in the past. I also cannot find approval for finding C in the residential scale commercial section because we are not getting a full-time resident in the apartment that satisfies the intent of what we're looking for in replacing the housing that was removed. So those are my comments.
Thank you. Councilmember Knight.
Thank you. Just another quick question of staff for myself and maybe for the public. Our conversation tonight about this use permit amendment is not, I think you may have answered this, but to just clarify again, is not specifically for this applicant. Does this use permit amendment go to the land or to the building?
Correct. It runs with the land, so a future tenant that operates in the same manner could do so without amending the permit.
Thank you. So, thank you. I also took an opportunity to look back and look at the hearings in 2015 and for the design review and that the council discussed this option, this application originally, and have looked at all the staff reports. And I cannot make the findings, and that's why I asked this question earlier. I cannot make the findings that 13 employees is consistent with this particular property or RSC. I think it's where I think this is a highlights a concern we in the future as we move forward. We look at issues with RSC, with e-commerce, mail order businesses. What we thought when we were approving uses in an RSC. We thought of the potential for local serving businesses, but in this marketplace, what we've seen in this particular application is e-commerce using office space, not to the benefit of the community, the neighborhood. This particular application is not providing us the housing opportunity that we lost with the residential house that was removed. So I can't make the findings for 13. What obviously concerns me in this conversation, we're really talking about the future use of this building, is the fact that we're only defining the property by a space based on square footage and not use. And how do we come to a proper defensible position that 3 office spaces and a conference room, which I don't think a conference room we should consider to be an open area for 7 or 8 employees to use. What's consistent in this neighborhood? What's consistent for RSC? So this is a challenge for me. I am concerned about how we move forward, how we protect that housing unit. I'm also hesitant to continue to perpetuate kind of a pay-as-you-go or a pay-to-play with resolving this issue with businesses purchasing parking, right-of-way parking spaces. So I want to continue, I guess, to hear what other council members say. It seems to me 4 employees in a 3 office, 1 conference room is probably not a realistic or a realistic number, but I could see where possibly a few more people would meet a 3 office use of 5 or 6 people. But I would be concerned about how we would find parking to accommodate going up by 1 or 2 more people for this particular location. That's all I have right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Dornbecker?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Number one, I'm very offended that this company didn't even have the courtesy to apply for a certificate to do business in the town of Yountville. And secondly, they were dishonest about, what they were doing, having more people in there than should have been. I'm very concerned when we whenever we take away a housing unit in this town, knowing that what we're confronted with the RHNA numbers and the housing crisis that we're going through, to have a pied a terre for somebody who lives in Pope Valley is just not, I can't see any way to justify that. And in the findings, I also felt that I could not agree with A under 17.156.02 that it was compatible and would not be detrimental to the health, safety, convenience, because with all of those people coming and going, and I don't understand how you could think you can have 13 employees and 5 parking spots or 6 parking spots. So I can't agree with that. I don't think that the area will be of any potential commercial or residential positive for the residents. I don't think it creates a benefit to any of the residents. All of those are in the findings, and I cannot support it. And I'm sorry to say now, I am tempted to offer to say that if that apartment were to become an affordable apartment at under market rate, we desperately need things like that. And I may be able to see my way clear to allow one more parking spot to accommodate that. But that's the only way in which I could see a finding that I could agree with. I'm sorry. And the fact that these 13 employees would then go with the use permit for, ages to come, the whole thing is just not working for me. Sorry.
Thank you. Before I invite Vice Mayor Dorman to speak, Gary, just a quick clarification. We don't have a resolution or final answer proposed tonight on this item, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And is it appropriate or inappropriate to offer up any possible options for consideration in the future? I don't want us to be saying, while we're trying to accommodate, if we're stepping out of the context of this particular request today about modifications that may or may not be considered in the future. I just want to make sure that we're not going outside of our authority today.
Yeah, understood. So if the council is looking towards approving it with some modification to the request, that can certainly be part of the discussion for this particular use permit that's in front of you tonight.
Okay, just to make sure that if we're offering up ideas for, unfortunately, the leasee is not here to hear it, but the landlord is. So, okay. So, Vice Mayor Dorman.
Thank you. I agree with the general sentiment that 13 is too many. I could not make a number of the findings based on 13. However, we've hit on a lot of questions tonight, many of which we know the answer to, and I think they kind of frame a further discussion to what the mayor was just talking about giving staff possibly some direction for a subsequent meeting. Does a building conform to design review? Yes. Does it comply with the building code, California building code? Yes. Does it comply with our parking code? Yes. Did the owner choose to and was allowed by staff in a previous council to proceed as a remodel and therefore take advantage of increased FAR? Yes, that happened. Do we have misgivings about the true residential nature of the second floor apartment? Yes, we do. Do we have misgivings about the true residential nature of a number of housing units that commercial businesses have used to increase their FAR? Yes, we do. We just to date have not been able to put the restrictions on there that we would like. But to me, this is one of several that we have in town that people are not using properly as residences. Does the current use of the apartment violate anything? No, our planning director has said it does not because we didn't put conditions. Was there a violation of the administrative use permit? Yes, there was. And as Councilmember Dornbecker said, unfortunately, that person is not here tonight. So we can't really get to the bottom of whether or not it was willful, deliberate, flagrant, whatever. But the bottom line is we have had other situations where it was willful, deliberate, and flagrant. And have we, when faced with a situation like that, ever said to a business, sorry, you were such a bad actor, we are going to tell you how many employees you can have? In my 4 years on the council, we have not. We have always either fined them, which we did here, and they paid it, or we have then said, okay, but now you have to straighten up and fly right, and this is how we're going to do it. So to me, the real question that we're looking at here is how many people reasonably, and I've already said it's not 13, how many people reasonably can fit into a 1,600 square foot office, no matter what the use is, but it's an office use. And if it's more than 4 or 5, the parking we have, then what, if anything, do we do about the parking situation? So how many people can reasonably fit? Obviously, there's a dispute about what was said by whom when. One thing that we didn't get to tonight was the project narrative turned in by Ms. Gates in 2014. And it says, I would like to propose a zone change to allow much needed office space here in Yountville on the main floor, or an expansion of Gates Estates real estate someday if needed. These businesses would conduct normal, quote, office functions with typical business hours from 8 to 6. The estimated number of office spaces could range anywhere from a single large office to possibly 4 offices. The number of employees would vary based on the needs of the business and what code allows based on the gross floor area. The configuration would be determined by the needs of the tenant. I don't say that that's good or bad, but I say that points out the confusion that we have had from the jump on this. Me personally, I feel that 1,600 square feet for 4 people, that is, if we take out 200 square feet, let's say for the bathroom and the kitchen, that's 1,400 square feet of usable area. That is, at 4 people, that's 350 square feet a person. That's almost a 2-car garage. So I feel, based on what Director Liston has said and what I have read, there was not a clear understanding that there would only be 4 employees. I also think if this office had come about and it were accountants or attorneys, there would not, being an attorney, I can tell you there's never an attorney that sits alone in an office and does all of his or her work by himself or herself. They have paralegals, they have secretaries, they have receptionists. Same with accountants, same with incubator businesses, also mentioned in a staff report. I just think that 4 was an unrealistic number. So I am somewhere north of 4 and south of 13. I mean, to me, I could go as high as 8 based on the square footage, because that would still be 175 square feet, almost a single car garage per person. And I think if we look at how offices work, unlike the mayor, I probably shouldn't have done it, but I did go on Sunday afternoon and looked in all the windows. So I have seen it. The spaces are nice. I totally could see 2 desks in most of the offices. I totally could see 3 desks, which are now currently in the conference room, still with a conference table. So I can see more employees, more than 4, less than 13. So that said, then the question becomes, how do we park those people? Because I do agree with our public comments and our other council members. We should not put those people on Humboldt or on Yount or anywhere like that. And we do have a history of working with businesses, Protea, Priest Ranch, RH. I think we have some leases between businesses to allow people who don't have enough on-site to still run their business. I think Priest Ranch is one of it. They're in our employee parking management plan. They're part of their permit under the parking management plan is if any employee not able to park on site must park in the Oak Leaf Court cul-de-sac. I kind of think that was the same thing I remember with Protea. It was before my time on council, but I think that the parking spaces that we sell or we lease, we don't sell, that we lease, and we have a property owner willing to work with us on that, they are typically, to my understanding, not in the face of our residents. To me, we need to treat all of our businesses as equally as we can. And on this one in particular, there's the added layer of who, if anyone, is a bad actor, because we have a property owner who says, I did not know this was happening. We have a tenant who says, I got bad information. We have a tenant who isn't here. So I think that just adds a layer of this, but I think there's a way that we can protect our neighborhoods. I get the public comments and I agree with them. But I think there's a way that we can protect our neighborhoods because we have some parking that we can lease a reasonable amount. I keep repeating, not 13, but a reasonable amount that we can lease, and just figure it out. So how much parking we would have to find and offer depends, of course, on how many employees we might all come up with. And I see a couple of ways to get this done. One is we can do a conventional use permit, which we're talking about. And then, as we've all figured out now, it runs with the land. So we've got this really weird situation where typically we don't put in a use permit, you can only have X number of employees. That's not usually what we put in. So if we put it in and we get another business that's really great, but they need twice the employees, and it's 5 years in the future when really everybody is in a driverless car, so parking is not so important, is that what we want to tie ourselves to? So my other suggestion in this is really very, very conceptual, and I would look to council members and staff, is maybe we look at this as a sort of like our business transition program, because I agree with council member, whichever council member, and I'm sorry, I've forgotten, said it doesn't seem, maybe it was council member Moeller said it does not seem like a bad financial situation. On the other hand, I do hear the applicant, I do hear Ms. Gates say, look, if I have to let go of this tenant, then it is going to be a bad situation. So maybe we look at this as a kind of business transition program, and we leave the administrative permit in place, which is 4 spaces, but we give a temporary reprieve from that, sort of like we do for our restaurants. Okay, usually you can only do this, but for this amount of time now you can do something else. So we give this temporary reprieve, and we set up some parameters for that, and they could be anything. They could be, you have to go into the employee parking management plan, and you have to have a sticker, and this is where you park. And if a resident sees your car anywhere else, it's an automatic, you're done. You're back to 4 people. You're back to 4 employees. And then that would give time also. I think everybody sees that something needs to be done. And a lot of us are pointing toward housing with our comments. Then that would give time to negotiate for owner, town, lessee to negotiate and maybe make good on some of the offers that Ms. Gates has made tonight, particularly in regard to the housing. So that's kind of where I am. I think we should try to do something that gives more than 8, that keeps the extra parking, that gives more than 4, somewhere I think 6 to 8, keeps the extra parking out of our neighborhoods, and is some sort of a temporary fix until we can get something that really, really will work.
Thank you. I'm going to try to avoid too much repetition, and also I'm not going to bury the lead. When I see in our staff report that we need to approve a use permit amendment today, we need to make all the findings below. I cannot make all the findings below, so I can't support the proposed amendment. Specifically looking at the findings, it's been mentioned already, traffic patterns, vehicles, type and volume of traffic, adequacy of proposed off-street parking and loading. No, that does not exist. Looking further down at some of the findings in the zoning district, I have no problem with the design of the building, with the structure, the existing services. All that is completely appropriate. What isn't appropriate is the intensity of employees, and therefore the intensity of the parking requirements. I'm not naive enough to believe carpooling is an answer. Not even close. We can't get businesses to commit their employees to park a block away from the business, much less park at the north end of town and carpool together. That is not a realistic solution It's not enforceable, frankly. We're not going to keep having our staff go out and try to monitor who's in what employee parking or carpool plan. So not a viable option. One of the things that frustrates me here is that I feel like we're in a tenant landlord dispute, because we have two stories, each saying different, completely different sets of facts, and we're supposed to decide who's telling the truth and who isn't. And I think, frankly, for Ms. Gates' benefit, her reputation and the fact that she's here representing her position carries weight. And I don't know if the tenant was asked not to be here or was instructed not to be here or just didn't show up to represent their position, but we have two separate accounts and one person that's here backing up her version. I don't want to try to, on the fly, come up with a solution today. I don't think that's appropriate. We have to actually allow staff to evaluate any other options than what has been requested. I do not support 13 employees in this space. It's also not, to be perfectly candid, it is not our responsibility to ensure financial viability of a business. We do everything we can to support businesses. It's not that we are legally obligated or even any other way obligated to maximize rent potential, and especially when our good faith has gone not only underappreciated, but basically ignored and discounted. We all talked about replacing that housing unit with an apartment that would be available to an employee, whether it be of a business in that building or other, somebody that can't afford a house and that would want to live and work locally. We all know that was our intention. It's been our intention every time we have granted FIR exemptions for housing units. In some cases, that's been honored, and I will call out North Block Hotel as one of those that's actually done a very good job of honoring it. I think Priest Ranch has been legitimate as well. And by not naming others, I'm not saying they aren't being honorable with that intention. I'm just saying to have represented this as a replacement for a residential unit, and now it's part of a lawyer's overnight accommodation when it's convenient is certainly not living up to the intent of that unit, nor is the offer to build an office building to bring in what, as far as I'm concerned, I'll speak for myself, not the other council members. I anticipated individual business entities that needed office space that is in such short supply in this town. That clearly, in my opinion, was the intent of this office. I'll call it a complex. Did we guarantee that they had to be 4 independent businesses? No, we did not. And that we didn't require it, but I certainly know that that was one of the desires, is to have, maybe it was a financial advisor in one office, and it was an additional space for the real estate activity in another office, and then they could share the conference room when they had larger meetings. I think the offices, the way they're laid out, absolutely support a permanent employee and clients that come in and have privacy. That's how I certainly envisioned it, but that's not how I can legally require a tenant to operate it. Turns out that's not the way the laws or our use conditions were written. So I need to be flexible with the business activity in those spaces. And if that means there are now 3 desks in there instead of 1, I can't legally prohibit that from happening. What I can prohibit from happening is pretending that 13 employees are going to all get there using 4 vehicles. And then there's still no parking for anyone that is either a guest or a client coming on site for any kind of a business activity. So I agree with most of what has been shared by the council. I would potentially be open to more than 4 employees on site I'm not prepared to even throw a number out there. And so, Steve, I see you waving.
I have a
Go
thought for you. In Gary, you need, if the council was to deny the use permit application as presented, but waive the requirement, because we limit how often a person can come back, because I do hear that there is some willingness on the part of the council to look at something different. But if we were to deny it and then direct staff to work with Ms. Gates, I think she's hearing from the council that there are some things, there's some things she's offered. There's a number range that the council, and then we could bring that potentially back at a later point in time. Is there a way, Gary, possibly to structure that? Because I do hear the mayor and the council's concern about trying to do something on the fly, but basically they're not willing to accept the proposal as is currently presented that's before them.
So Gary, hold that thought. I'm going to finish my comments before we start going to how might we resolve this. So what I also want to just, again, I've brought it up before, I'm going to bring it up again. We are now dealing in 2021 with parking conditions that were established in some cases over 20 years ago. And we are out of necessity, and this is an example of that necessity, where we have a business right next door that has 0 parking. It was never required to have parking when it was Mosswood, didn't have to have parking when it was, the real estate office. And so it was decided back then that on-site parking, on-street parking was perfectly acceptable for both employees and patrons. We have, over the last 20 years, had to, out of necessity, stop that practice and require on-site parking for new businesses. And we have, in many cases, required all of the employees to be on site. And in some cases, we've allowed some employees to be on site, some patrons to have parking on site, and then additional overflow depending on the circumstances. Like, is that overflow parking in part of the residential, or is it in part of the commercial area of town? And so this happens to be on a street that used to be entirely residential and now is half residential and half commercial, I will just say, unofficially. And so this is always going to be a challenge when we have a shoulder situation like on Yount Street. Everybody that lives on Yount Street knows that they're on the shoulder of the commercial district and that there is going to be some overflow. Humboldt is no different than that. If all of these were houses and not even commercial activities, there would still be overflow from our businesses, because that's what happens in such a small town. But we don't have to continue to allow a disproportionate amount of impact on our surface streets that do impact our residents, especially when we have the ability to not allow that. And, I understand, Cindy, you put a lot of money into building the building. That was your choice. You bought that property as your choice, and you are renting it to a tenant is your choice. And the conditions were set. Now, granted, we keep learning that sometimes the language can be either misinterpreted or taken advantage of because of the leeway that we intentionally leave in there. We can't always legally require what our intent is. And so I do think there could be some flexibility here, certainly not to the extreme that the applicant is requesting on behalf of the tenant. And so with that, I will conclude. I'm not prepared to support any modification of the request today without thorough consideration by staff on what the impacts might be, and apparently more explicit conditions for the activity in that building. So with that, Gary, if you wanted to respond to Steve's statement.
Sure. So what Steve's referring to is 17.156030. It says that seeking a change in an authorization of a condition previously imposed cannot do so for the first 6 months after it's granted, and then thereafter more than 12-month period. this would be considered seeking a change in an authorization of a condition previously imposed. There's already an exception in the ordinance for how to bring seek a change more frequently. There's a procedure for claiming that it violates a constitutional right or the takings clause. The only concern I would raise in giving an exemption here is a possible unfair argument from someone else it's imposed to, especially because there is a procedure for seeking a change through the ordinance already. That's the concern I would raise.
Thank you, Gary. And it may be that if that's 6 months, that gives us the opportunity to work with the applicant and address, we've heard from the mayor and the council, I think they would want us to have a different proposal perhaps from the applicant, and for us to evaluate that would be and to bring it back. So maybe that's the denial, if that's the council's prerogative. And then we work with Ms. Gates on a new application coming forward.
Let me ask Gary this question. So we've had the public hearing, we've had deliberation. If we were to continue this to another date within that time period and reopen the public hearing, is that considered a different process? It could be something as in a matter of weeks instead of months?
Yes, that could be sooner. You could reopen and continue this hearing and then come to a different conclusion on the application before you. And then it would still be the same application.
Right. So I acknowledge, even though I have made it, I think, very clear that it's not our obligation to try to make sure it's a financially viable situation, Cindy, what we don't want to do is also unfairly, punish or have a negative impact on you and the tenant, frankly, more you than the tenant, I will say right now. But if we have a legal authority to do that, I think that gives us enough time to reconsider, but not the required 6 months that Gary and Steve were just talking about. So, Gary, if you would suggest that I reopen the public hearing and then continue that public hearing to a date either certain or uncertain in a matter of the next 2 or 3 meetings, is that what you're proposing?
Yes. So it should be continued to a date certain unless the town would like to renotice the public hearing. If it's not continued to a date certain, we'll need to renotice it.
I think we should try to have a date certain. Sandra, I'm going to turn to you and Steve to determine how much time you feel like you need to vet other options. It could be that it's not that long. If we're talking about February 2 or later in February or in March, it also would give, I think, the applicant and the tenant time to actually have a conversation that clarifies. Because clearly we have 2 stories being told to us.
Well, I think
we need some clarity.
Right. And I think Ms. Gates needs to take the lead in being the applicant for the conditional use permit, because we're hearing very clearly that 13 is not it. Somewhere a little bit more than 4, probably.
I would not promise any.
I'm just saying, but I'm just saying we're hearing that.
No, I don't agree.
Don't promise any number, but what I would say is
I'm hearing, but what I think we need to do is we need time to sit down. Ms. Gates needs to come back with something. Staff can work with her, meet with her. We definitely have abilities to, the increased parking demand can be dealt with in a similar way as we did with Protea. The structure's there. We can work to identify it. We can look at other appropriate conditions. So I'm going to agree with you, Mayor, that February 2nd probably is the most tangible, because we need some time. And frankly, Ms. Gates needs to sit down and determine what is an appropriate, and then we can evaluate that and come back to you. I think, and then does that—
Sandra, are you comfortable with February 2nd?
Yes.
Okay. And then, of course, if for some reason we had to, we could continue it from that date on that date. But I'm going to propose the council consider, I don't know that I have to, Gary, do I have to get a vote of the council, or can I just reopen and continue it?
You can reopen it. I think it should be a vote of the council to continue it to a date certain.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and reopen this public hearing and ask the council to consider, and if so, make a motion to continue the public hearing to our February 2nd, which is a special meeting that will be starting at 3 p.m.
So moved.
So Councilmember Dornbecker made that motion. I believe
Second.
Vice Mayor Dorman seconded that motion. Is there any further discussion by the council about the continuation to February 2? We're throwing a new curve at you, Councilmember Knight, so just wanted to make sure you had a chance. So, okay, with that, Michelle, would you take a roll call vote on the continuation of this public hearing to February 2?
Yes, Mayor. Councilmember Dornbecker,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Dorman,
Yes.
Councilmember Moeller,
Yes.
Councilmember Knight,
Yes.
Mayor Dunbar.
Yes.
Thank you.
So that does pass. So we are continuing this public hearing to our special meeting on February 2nd. And staff
At
will be
3
working
p.m.
with the applicant at 3 p.m. Staff will be working with the applicant, and I'll say landlord and tenant, to prepare for that meeting date. Thank you, everyone, for the very thorough discussion on this item, and we'll continue it in a month.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move right ahead to our first administrative regular item, item 10. Thank you, Cindy. I don't mean to just
Thank you.
totally ignore you. Thank you for being on our meeting, but we do have more business to get to now.
Okay.
This is the annual review of our town council appointments to various boards, committees, commissions, and ad hoc subcommittees. I'll even add in standing committees. And so we are going to have that conversation as soon as I can find that part of the agenda. Michelle, are you going to lead us on this?
I am, Mayor. Thank you. As the mayor said, this is our annual review of council appointments to various regional, countywide, and local boards and commissions, ad hoc and standing subcommittees. In the staff report, and in more particular, we do have a new council member, so we need to council needs to make assignments to those positions previously served on by council member Jeffrey Durham. And the basic action for this evening is to review the current ad hoc and standing committee assignments, consider disbanding the Yountville Elementary School Commemorative Art Ad Hoc Committee, consider disbanding the Cannabis Standing Committee, and then considering whether or not to establish any additional ad hoc committees. What is attached to your staff report is a roster of current appointments, and I've highlighted those meeting bodies where Councilmember Durham served, and I did miss one at the very end, which is the Small Projects Standing Committee. So that'll be an additional one that we need to talk about. So this is also an opportunity for council to express an interest in what they want to serve on, continue to serve on, or perhaps no longer consider serving on. And then this action is taken by a majority of council. Following your action, anybody appointed to the countywide boards and commissions, I will then forward minute order action to the county clerk or NVTA as appropriate so that they can properly agendize any appointments that they need.
We aren't able to discuss this directly with each other about what changes might be desired or not, and so we have to kind of make it up as we go. I'm going to offer some suggestions that may or may not satisfy everyone, but I feel like in some of these cases it's intentional that I'm recommending certain people for certain committees, but we can be a little bit flexible with that. And in some cases, I may be repeating what's currently existing, but specifically Vice Mayor Dorman on the ABAG committee, I believe you've been representing that already. I would continue to recommend that. Either council members Dornbecker or Knight for the MCE representation on that committee. I also, knowing that Councilmember Knight is new with no committee appointments yet, the WIC and or NVTA, Napa Valley Transportation Authority, alternate positions could be something that would be appropriate for Councilmember Knight. Also, we may need a new alternate on the Countywide Climate Action Committee. Councilmember Dornbecker and I are on that committee currently. Also, I was going to recommend that we dissolve the Small Projects Happiness Committee because we can handle projects on a case-by-case basis without that committee, I believe, unless the council feels otherwise. The Public Wi-Fi Committee, similarly, and also the Parking Ad Hoc Committee. Again, I'm open to hear thoughts from the council. These are just committees that we have either standing or ad hoc committees that don't necessarily have the intended mission that they did originally. Either spending money that was budgeted for small projects, for example, or Parking Ad Hoc Committee, which may have been for specific properties such as the RH agreement for the Yountville Community Park parking development. So those are just thoughts I had. Looking forward to hearing others. And I think given that context, Michelle, if you want to go through the roster, and I can go either way, either deciding the vacancies now caused by Councilmember Durham's departure and fill those in, or we could go through, if anyone has a desire to leave a current committee for a certain reason, we could go through the roster as it's presented here. Michelle, do you have a preference?
I have a preference of perhaps filling the seats of Jeffrey Durham and then going through asking if there are any changes that council members would like to see.
Okay. So with that, I'm scrolling down to page 2, which is the NVTA. The second alternate position is open. And that was
I think you can consider the first. I'll give up the first alternate as well.
You're going to give it. You would like to give up the first alternate?
Yeah,
okay.
I don't need to be an alternate.
I would say that we have very rarely gone to either alternate on NVTA. The vice mayor and I have had rather consistent attendance there, but either of those spots are available. This is where I just look to Councilmember Knight, your hand is raised. You're on mute though.
Thank you. There you go. So I just wanted to offer just initially definitely my willingness to take the position, to replace the positions that Councilmember Durham served on in the past. I mean, in the past 20 years that I had the experience of serving on Napa Valley Transportation, the Watershed Committee, Upper Valley Disposal. So I've had experience in those committees in the past, but I'm very happy right now to take the positions that are available, open from for where Councilmember Durham served. And then at some point I'd like to talk to you also about the standing and ad hoc committees, but we could just start there. I'm very willing and interested to serve where I can, if other council members are considering changing seats or positions. Thank you.
Thank you. So any other council members? So what we would be talking about, holding off for the moment, Councilmember Muller's offer to not be an alternate for NVTA, but that would be Councilmember Knight becoming an alternate for NVTA. That would also mean Councilmember Knight would be on the Watershed Information and Conservation Council along with Councilmember Dornbecker. Also, he would be an alternate on the Countywide Climate Action Committee for myself and Councilmember Dornbecker. And let's see, then we get down to the ad hoc committee. So those are the boards and commissions. Are there thoughts on any of those? Vice Mayor Dorman?
Thank you. So if I may speak directly to Councilmember Knight, you said you had been on NVTA before. Do you have an interest on serving as primary on the committee, on the authority?
I would. I mean, I'd be obviously interested in the mayor's comments, but I would definitely be willing to serve on that board. I spent a few years on that board in the past.
So I mean, I have no ownership over NVTA. I'm happy to continue to serve, or I'm happy to slide to the first and probably only alternate, whatever. I just don't have a real horse in the race. So I guess, Mayor, maybe you weigh in on that.
Yeah, I'll make the recommendation then that Vice Mayor, you remain as one of the two on that committee. I find it valuable, the impact you have on the analysis of staff reports as well as reporting out. And to be candid, the current Transportation Authority is definitely different than the NCTPA was, that had transportation and planning as its agency. And I think there are some changes to that I would prefer that we had Councilmember Knight joining as an alternate to have a little bit more time to get up to speed. If we want to make a change in the future, after there's a little more familiarity with the current, because there are some major projects that are coming before the NCTPA board or the NVTA board that need some institutional background knowledge, I think, right now. And I think it would not be the appropriate time to make that change. In 6 months to a year, that could potentially be a very different set of circumstances.
Thank you. And I'm happy to continue to serve. So thank you.
And I appreciate the mayor's comments, and will attend to those meetings to get up to speed, because I do understand there's a change in the nature of that organization. So thank you.
And it's a lot easier when they're on Zoom. You could do it from home.
So Mayor, so that would put Councilmember Eric Knight as the first alternate then, and then opening up the second alternate because Councilmember Mueller is interested in no longer serving in that spot.
Councilmember Dornbecker, I can't tell if you're raising your hand like, no way, or I'll do it. Oh, you'll do it. Okay. So we'll have Councilmember Knight as the first alternate, Councilmember Dornbecker as the second alternate on NVTA.
Great, thank you.
Getting down to page 3, countywide, we have Watershed Information and Conservation Council. I have not served on that, so I can't speak to whether it's the same as it was previously for Councilmember Knight, but I think that would probably be a good fit without objection.
Yes.
Okay.
As you mean as the alternate, or
with the two of you? Oh,
yeah.
Yes, as the alternate of that.
Great, that's fine.
Yes.
Okay.
And then
thank you.
Yeah, Councilmember Knight, if your interest as the alternate on the Countywide Climate Action Committee, unless there's anyone else that wants to compete for that alternate position. Seeing nobody look up, I'll take that as a Councilmember Knight.
Thank you.
By default.
Okay. And then we're going to move on to the ad hoc and standing committees. Is that where we're going?
Yes.
Well, I think we haven't talked about ABAG.
Okay.
Vice Mayor Dorman and I serve on that. I mean, I'm happy to continue as an alternate. I usually attend those meetings with her, so.
And I would be comfortable with the two of you continuing in your roles with ABAG if you are both willing to do that.
Okay.
Okay,
Yes.
I'm seeing head nods for both. Okay, thank you.
Again, I think that's a committee that there have been a lot of high profile issues coming up. Certainly the new cycle of the housing allocation. So again, institutional background knowledge, I think, is going to be very helpful on that committee as well.
I guess I better turn a light on.
I'll just send Jason over to your house to get the lights going like he does for me here. So then I think we could go down. We do have to decide if, and I see the member of our ad hoc committee has already been lined out. No need for that committee any further. And I was suggesting potentially to end the parking ad hoc committee and the Wi-Fi hotspot ad hoc committees for kind of a lack of core mission, but open for consideration by the council on those two. Before we do that, again, for the same reasons I've mentioned, we are about to reactivate conversations with the county as it relates to Domain Shandong. So I would certainly propose that Councilmember Moeller and I continue in that capacity. And I don't think we've done anything with the town council protocols in a long time. So
no, but we do have section 10 communications. There was one area that we didn't finalize. So leave it up to you if you want to have you and Councilmember Moeller continue.
I'm fine with that if we want to do that. And I think that's maybe where we could, well, we'll handle these one at a time. As long as Councilmember Moeller is not looking to change that, or are you?
Are we talking about the protocols now?
Yes.
I'm fine with staying on the protocols.
Okay. And I'll continue unless somebody has a really strong, oh yes, Vice Mayor, your hand is up.
Oh, thank you. I had skipped protocols, sorry, to go to the parking ad hoc.
I'll say we're there now.
Okay, so I would like to, I guess, defend the continued existence of the parking ad hoc, although I was not on it. I think this discussion we've just had for an hour and a half or 2 hours on Domaney points up the need for a continued parking committee, subcommittee of some kind. I do think possibly we could ask and answer, our mandate could change to ask and answer some of the bigger questions, some of the policy questions, and then to a lesser extent, some of the implementation questions. And I think I think those are very good reasons to keep it in. And I think they dovetail with, I feel that we committed to our residents that parking is a priority for us and how that will all unfold. And I feel like to keep the commitment to them, it is an ad hoc, we can meet on an as needed basis. I feel that we should keep parking in place. And
I'd be very happy to give up my second seat to any of our newcomers or somebody else, since you're talking about something changing. So I'm fine with giving up my seat there.
And just to be clear, if we discontinue ad hoc committees, it does not mean that we aren't prioritizing. What it does mean, and the reason I was suggesting it was because I think that the mission of that committee was to deal with how to establish public-private partnerships on certain parts of the properties that are town, public lands, like the sidewalks at the south end of town that have been built and parking has been added, like what happened at Yountville Community Park with the building of public and dedicated private parking spaces. So I certainly understand if we agree that a committee is needed to continue to review policy that then comes back to a council conversation, and 2 council members are willing to serve in that capacity, then that's fine. Right now, you now have nobody on it because Councilmember Moeller said she wants off.
Well, I'm certainly willing to step up on that.
And Mayor, I'm definitely very interested in serving on that ad hoc committee. I think I think there'll be opportunities, just as the Vice Mayor mentioned, this last use permit. But as we continue forward, maybe in the next year or so, through the phases of reviewing the zoning code changes to update them to comply with the new general plan, that there'll be opportunities for conversations that an ad hoc committee could provide and then bring back to council.
Okay, I think what we're going to have to do is get a little bit more clarity, not necessarily right now, but one of the things that maybe Councilmember Knight and Vice Mayor Dorman can do, assuming this is what we're going to do with the Parking Ad Hoc Committee, is establish a new mission for that committee. Because it's not needed for its old analysis of specific projects. And so if it's going to take on a different role, that's fine. Define what that role is and how that's going to support the council, and then you can move forward there. We're
And
all
also,
clear on-
if I could add, Mayor, also, if there's going to be a longer term parking, is it going to be established as a standing committee or ad hoc? So perhaps that could be part of the equation when they're identifying priorities.
I think we keep it an ad hoc committee right now, and if they determine that there's
I think, Mayor,
more permanent realization for it, then it can become a standing committee in the future.
I think that's appropriate, and we may want to just for that purpose talk about this being the Parking Impacts Committee, and because you are correct, the prior committee focused on the potential partnerships with the two. I'm just trying to make sure there's a clear separation. There could be broader policy, but keep us also so that we're staying within the legal parameters of an ad hoc committee, because if it continues
How
to have
about this?
the same.
Let's call it the Townwide Parking Policy Review Ad Hoc Committee.
There we go. I think that works, because then we will work on that, because otherwise it looks like we're continuing the same thing. And to your point, the prior ad hoc committee provided guidance on both what actually was the first public partnership with the South Lot deck back with Hotel Yountville on 2 occasions, as well as provided guidance in working with the chamber and the pilot 3-hour parking and the limo ban. So you're correct that some of the things they were working on have come to fruition at this point. So that provides a better structure, and we can certainly work in our first meeting to better understand the policy objectives and bring them back to the council.
So that would be the TPPRAC.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
We have to distinguish it from PRAC, or else people will think it's about Parks and Rec.
It's the TP rack.
Excuse me, could I make a suggestion that the small projects standing committee, the happiness committee, I would like to serve on that committee if someone would serve on that committee with me.
Well, I will.
Oh, wonderful. So we got that covered.
So that was another that I feel like you need to, for that to continue, it needs to have a defined purpose going forward. And so just your first task is going to be, what is your intent of existing as an ad hoc committee?
Well, I appreciate that, Mayor. It did, because of our budget constraints, we did put it on hold, but this will give Councilmember Dornbecker and me a chance to revitalize it and come back to you all with a mission statement.
And I need to just caution, and this is not just about this one particular committee, we still haven't seen the financial repercussions of the pandemic hit our budget. And so just so there's an understanding that by having this ad hoc committee continue, there is not an automatic assumption that we have funding available for any and all applications. So that's going to be just a footnote that I put out there, that there may need to be some pulling back of some of what we had been doing.
Yeah. Understood. Thank you.
Good. Okay. Thank you for volunteering for that ad hoc committee. Let's see, Michelle. So
Mayor Dunbar.
Yeah, Councilmember Knight.
I would just like to broach a discussion of the possibility of beginning a standing or ad hoc committee for the California Veterans Home. And I think there's a strong case to be made that we have a standing committee for the California Veterans Home. There's any one of a number of a half a dozen issues in the next few years where a conversation by a subcommittee would benefit the council. And it's our largest neighborhood. We also have a neighborhood that'll hopefully very soon maybe will come out of isolation And I think it's important for them to know that that we're here to listen to their issues, especially as the state moves forward with housing or facility updates on that property. And so I would be very supportive of a standing committee for the California Veterans Home.
So I will caution, while I agree, certainly a large part of our community and a critical part of our community, we have had more formal representation, including reports to the council from previous administration. We were asked by CalVet to discontinue that very specifically by the Department of Veterans Affairs because it is a jurisdiction that is not ours. It is under the State Department of Veterans Affairs. When we start to have conversations that may impact the Veterans Home, we may be inappropriately out of our jurisdiction. And I caution about this because we had, as mayor, I started inviting members of the Allied Council to give reports out to the council. And even that limited formal interaction, we were asked to not do that because there is kind of a misunderstanding of roles and responsibilities and whose authority is whose authority. And I don't think it's our position to make that decision without at least checking with the Veterans Home Administration first and seeing if they feel like that's a productive or an inappropriate opportunity. So I would not support making that decision today until we have some outreach with the Veterans Home.
Mayor, the only thing I would just encourage is that we maybe continue that conversation with the home administrator. And I think there's just an opportunity, even as an ad hoc committee and more informally, to meet and find a way to build our conversations and with that neighborhood. And so I hope at some point we could maybe come back to discuss that and look at an opportunity, and if there's openness from the home, but also to find a way to make those connections with the members. So
and there's no disagreement. I totally agree. That was why I started that program of having them come down and report out to the council. But that is not our jurisdiction to control. And you and up to 2 members of the council are always free to communicate, not necessarily at this point to represent the council, but and obviously we can't go up there and interact like normal, but I know we're talking about once the pandemic restrictions are over. But I just set that context that we definitely need to broach this subject with Administrator Peak and potentially Secretary Bassiani, because that's where it came from, that they were not comfortable with our kind of that kind of interaction on a formal level. So certainly we could certainly have that conversation with Administrator Peak and find out if there is a willingness to do that once the lockdown's lifted.
And I would also, just to follow up, Mary, you're correct. We did have, we've also had efforts in the past about including a Veterans Home representative, for example, with a designated spot on the Parks and Rec Commission. And they even suggested that that was not something that they wanted to continue. I do think it's worthy of a conversation, and I recognize where the interest is coming from. But I do think you pointed out jurisdictional. I also see that there's a potential, depending on how it's structured, because you also have what is the town relationship with CDVA in terms of that, which could be different than what I'm potentially hearing a little bit from Councilmember Knight, which is the resident members. So that we just, and perhaps I can have some conversations with him, and you and I, Mayor, can talk more to flush that out. And I'd also, this is a process, because since we're currently dealing with existing, typically when we bring a new ad hoc or standing committee, we agendize it, we have an understanding of what the objectives are. So that typically is how we would bring that about. And then we would include, approving the new committee and then appointing the members. So we still have opportunity to further evaluate and discuss this. And that's also the process that we would use for anything new that the council might want to add that was not on the existing slate, so to speak.
And
and I'll just say, reiterate, and then I think we need to move on from it. That part of the problem was there are residents at the home, yes, part of our community, and we are their elected officials. But part of the problem was that residents would bring a project, an idea to the administration. It would be potentially turned down or modified. They didn't like the outcome. They'd come to us and say, can't you make this happen for us? And that's where the jurisdictional crossover started happening. I know there's a particular resident that's really been interested in building a walking path from town up the hill to the veterans home. That is not our kind of a project that we have authority to make a decision about, because most of that is not our property. And so that's where I don't want us to create a circumstance where it's one parent against another parent, and we're being played off each other for an outcome. And I want to respect their jurisdiction as much as we expect them to respect our jurisdiction. So.
And thank you. I just wanted to say that I appreciate all the work, Mayor, you've done, as well as town manager. I know you've done a lot of work to represent the home, and I just and I appreciate that. And so I just look forward to how we continue to connect with the home as this pandemic ends, and hopefully the near future. But thank you.
I appreciate that, and thank you. And just a quick reminder, we're going to take a 3-minute comfort break after this, but once allied council meetings get back to a more level of normal, many of us frequented those meetings and gave updates and heard comments from residents. That's certainly a way that we can continue to socialize and interact on a more informal basis. So whether that can be done by Zoom or not, that's a different issue. So with that, I'm just going to, because I've been asked for a brief comfort break, we'll take 3 minutes. Please keep that to a maximum of 5 minutes.
Is this, are we done with this item then? Or are we coming back to it?
We can actually, let's try to wrap this up and actually vote on it.
Yeah, we need a motion and final.
Was there any other question or comment about the committees as we have reviewed them?
I need to hear about the Wi-Fi committee. Were you disbanding, or is it going to continue?
Well, Steve, can you confirm? I believe that we don't have a need for that committee right now. Is that correct?
Correct.
I think the committee, originally that was one of those things that had a narrower focus, and it's now broadened. My reaction from the prior committee and when we presented some draft ideas to the council was that the council as a whole would prefer to have council workshops on some of those topics going forward, rather than have that stay at the committee level. So I would support that, the disbanding, because it's a misnomer to say that it's only a public Wi-Fi discussion, but that's how it started several years ago.
Right, and so I do believe that we should disband that. Again, it doesn't mean that we're not going to be continuing to discuss the issues, but in a different format. And the same with obviously the cannabis standing committee. That purpose has ended, and we can eliminate that committee also.
Right, and I just point out, we want to probably make sure that the members of the Housing Standing Committee and the Emergency Preparedness Standing Committees are both willing to continue serving.
I wasn't going to give them options to do anything other.
There you go. So we'll take that as a yes.
And then, if I can, before the vote, confirm with Michelle, did any of the changes in appointments affect the Form 806? And if so, I would recommend those council members abstain from voting for their own appointment.
Okay, Councilmember Moeller, did your stipend change for LAFCO? And is anyone else receiving a site stipend that I'm unaware of?
If it did, it might go up by CPI. I did not have time to, I saw your email today, didn't have time to check.
Wait a
But
minute,
you-
somebody's getting paid to be on one of these committees?
Well, we only meet 6 times a year. So it's actually a CKH mandate, I think, that we get paid, or it was at one time or something. I don't know, Gary, is that right? Is that where it
What do you
came from?
Yes, the stipend is allowed under CKH, yes.
Yeah.
So what do you
So-
suggest, Town Attorney Bell?
I think it's, my guess, I don't even look, because, I think it's maybe like $125 every 2 months or something like that.
I think you're at 150.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's
It's such a large amount, it's the blip on the radar.
So Gary, are you saying that Councilmember Moeller should not, she should abstain from the one particular LAFCO appointment?
No, she does not need to based on that information.
Okay, so everyone
Hey,
can vote.
Can I
as-
ask a question?
Yeah, hold on just a second. Everyone can vote on all of the recommended modifications then, Gary?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, Councilmember Dornbecker?
I just wanted to make sure then that on the Land Use Ad Hoc Committee for Domaine Chandon, Marjorie, you have to answer this. I guess you would know. Is that it's not considered any friction from also being LAFCO on the LAFCO board?
No, because once a property is in your sphere of influence, we call that your SOI, then the 2 jurisdictions are required under CKH to meet and discuss and negotiate property tax.
I see. Okay. Thank you. I just was wondering.
Yeah, so basically it's not a LAFCO issue.
Anymore.
It's more in kind of internal county town.
Just kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a requirement if the SOI moves to annexation.
Thank you.
Mayor, can
Okay.
I recap the changes before we have a motion quickly?
Quickly, yes, please.
Okay, NVTA, we have Councilmember Eric Knight as the first alternate, Councilmember Dornbecker as the second alternate. Councilmember Knight, moving on, is going to be the alternate for WIC, and he's going to be the alternate for the Countywide Climate Action Committee. And we confirm the existing appointments for ABAG of the Vice Mayor and Councilmember Dornbecker. The Domaine Chandon is confirmed remaining as is. The Town Council Protocols Ad Hoc Committee remaining as is. Parking Ad Hoc is being renamed Townwide Parking Policy Review Ad Hoc Committee, and Vice Mayor Dorman, Councilmember Knight are serving on that. Disbanding the Wi-Fi Ad Hoc Committee, disbanding the Yountville Elementary School Ad Hoc Committee, and the Small Projects is staying, and Vice Mayor Dorman is serving, and Councilmember Dornbecker is serving, and we'll come back with a mission statement. And Housing and Emergency Preparedness is staying the same, and disbanding Cannabis Standing Committee. If that's accurate, then a motion.
Did you mention NVTA?
I did at the very beginning.
Okay.
Yes.
I move that we accept those appointments and serve as noted.
Second.
Thank you.
Everybody's clear on what you're committing to, okay? Motion by Councilmember Dornbecker, second Councilmember Knight. Roll call vote, please, Michelle.
Councilmember Dornbecker,
Yes?
Councilmember Knight,
Aye.
Councilmember Moeller,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Dorman,
Yes.
Mayor Dunbar.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for the commitments to additional service to our community in those roles. Let's take a 3 to 4 minute comfort break, and we'll be back here by 5:40, please.
Okay, how do I do this now?
5:45 now, I don't know.
It's 5:36 on my clock.
If Jason shows the slide that we're on pause, Michelle, it should be showing on YouTube, and you can just leave it running.
Okay, well, I can't see YouTube, so
Okay, let me double check it.
thank you. I'm sorry.
And we are back from our brief break. Thank you for that accommodation. We're going to move on now to agenda item 11A, which is our monthly financial reports for November 2020. Is that Celia, Kyle, both of you?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. That will be me tonight.
Okay.
So good evening, Mayor and council members. Here we are tonight looking at the monthly financial report as of November 30th, which represents 41.7% of the fiscal year. So we are nearing the midway point. Starting with the general fund, property and sales tax continue to roll into the general fund. Sales tax is down considerably due to COVID impacts on retail and restaurants, which is continuing from prior months. The hardest hit, of course, has been to our bread and butter, the transient occupancy tax. This report only reflects collections through September. We did see some collections in October and November. However, with the current stay-at-home order still in place, we can expect that TOT collections will continue to be quite low, at least through January. General fund expenditures through November remain under budget as a whole, but as you can see from the report, even with being at only 30% of total budgeted general fund expenditures, we have only collected about 20% of revenues. So we will be needing to attempt to close that gap, which at this time of the report is about $800,000. Just to quickly touch on capital projects and enterprise funds, you can see from the report that they are in reasonable shape. Projects are underway as planned, and revenues in the enterprise operating funds are at or slightly above budget projections. I will point out water purchases, which are slightly higher than budget. That is mostly because the cost for purchasing water from the Veterans Home is very much an unknown at the time of budgeting. So we really have to rely on an educated assumption at that point. Then throughout the year, we track water purchases by using the cost per acre foot from the previous year to more accurately project what the expense will be in the current year. And then of course, do a true up with the Veterans Home at the end of the fiscal year to find the actual cost of water purchases. So going forward, we will be bringing the council a more in-depth analysis of our fiscal health with the December monthly financial report on February 2nd. We do know that we will be needing to utilize the $753,000 that council approved to remain in unassigned fund balance to help cover this TOT shortfall. We will also be looking into generating savings within general fund departments where possible, and forecasting the amount of the revenue stabilization reserve funds that will be needed for this current fiscal year. Does the council have any questions about the report that I can answer?
I'm not seeing, looks like Councilor Dornbecker, are you trying to unmute? No, okay. I don't see any hands. So yeah, it certainly sounds like we are not getting out of the lockdown in the Bay Area region in at least until through January. You're right about that. It would not surprise me if it was much further than that. So thankfully you're being rather conservative with your forecasting. Yeah, I don't see any hands. So, and do we have any public comment on this, Michelle? No? Okay, thank you. So thank you. We'll receive and file that. Are you going to continue on our next item?
I'll take over from here.
Okay, Kyle, go ahead.
Thanks, Celia. All right, good evening, everybody. Finance Department has been working on implementing our new budgeting software, OpenGov. And so tonight I wanted to provide you a quick status update on that project. Starting back in July, we worked closely with our OpenGov implementation team to gain an understanding of how the software works and ensure that the transition to using this new budgeting software will be as smooth as possible. Since July, we have imported the town's chart of accounts into OpenGov and cleaned it up, make sure it all looks accurate. We entered the town's salary and benefit information into their workforce module. And this is what's going to automatically feed into the departmental budgets. And then we've learned how to add pictures, videos, website links, and other features to our future online budget book. And of course, overall, just through our training, we've gained an overall understanding of the software. Since most of our financial data has been imported to the system by now, and it will continue to update automatically from here on out, our more recent trainings have been focused on the actual design of the budget book. As of now, we are in the final stages of this design process, and we will provide you with examples of what you can expect the budget to look like in an upcoming council meeting, maybe in a couple months or so. So for our future fiscal year 21-22 budget, there will be both a physical copy, just like you're used to, and as well as a new interactive online copy. We are excited about the online version, as it's going to allow the viewers to interact with the budget in ways that just aren't possible with the physical form. So for example, as viewers are reading the department narratives, they'll be able to click on links that send them to pages on our town website. So for example, like the master fee schedule, when they see that on our budget, they'll be able to click on it, and then it goes straight to our website. And also links to external documents they'll be able to click on and download. Viewers will also be able to view an overall department budget information and then click on different segments of the graph to drill down to get more detailed information for whatever they're looking for. And departments themselves will be able to provide viewers with videos, additional pictures, and other types of visual aids, just to make it more robust than the physical copy. Overall, we're happy to report that implementation and use of the OpenGov software has gone as expected and is on schedule. Next week, I'm going to start meeting with the departments to train them on how to use OpenGov and how to start entering their department budget information for fiscal year 21-22. And we are also planning on finalizing the design of the budget over the next couple of weeks. Any questions?
Looks like Vice Mayor Dorman has a question.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. Sort of a compound question, how much have we spent on this to date, and what costs remain to be spent?
So that's a good question. We have spent the total for the first year implementation. Celia, do you know off the top of your head what that amount was?
I'm looking it up. I think it was 32.5 or 33.5.
So.
I can look that up.
Okay, just a ballpark is fine. And then how much remaining costs do we have?
This fiscal year, there will not be any more costs. The costs will be going forward into maintenance for future years, which I think is, I'd have to relook at the contract to get a concrete number, but I think it's between 15 and 17,000 for annual maintenance and use and support.
I'm trying to pull it up as well.
Thank you. I just want to get an order of magnitude. Thank you very much, both of you.
You're welcome.
You just wanted to check and see if you both had the whole budget memorized. That's really what it was.
Not yet.
All right. Any other questions? Kyle, thank you for that. We will receive and file that also. Okay, next up, capital improvement project update. A lot of this, there's been a lot of banging and stuff in my neighborhood. I know that. I'm looking forward to an update. Joe T, are you there? Or who is it? Is it John?
It's John, yes.
Okay.
With the help of Sam, who's going to share the screen for the PowerPoint. So I'm ready to go. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. As you know, I'm John Ferninger, Deputy Public Works Director, and I'm proud to bring you an update on the major projects that have been occurring in the Washington Park neighborhood. Next slide, please. So starting off with the Washington Park Water Project, it began in earnest on October 8th. It was very invasive. All of the invasive work is complete. And what that means is the contractor went through and installed all the new parallel water lines. Then they went back and connected all of the customer water services. And then we also switched all of the fire hydrants over to the new system. And just before Christmas, they finished doing most of the paving and trench paving work. And this week you'll see them out there abandoning some of the valves that are no longer needed and doing pavement work to fill those holes for the valves that are going to be abandoned. And I want to pause and say thank you to, on behalf of both the town and Subterra, our contractor, I want to say thank you to the residents of Washington Park. It has been a busy few months, and we very much appreciate everyone's patience and understanding as we went through this project. as you'll hear today in this presentation, we're not done yet because the paving project is coming, but the paving project won't be near as invasive or disruptive as the water project was. So next slide, please. So brief update, the project did take a little bit longer than we anticipated. We thought they would be done by December 11th, according to the original baseline schedule, but it didn't work out that way. There was no big reason why it didn't. It just took a little bit longer than anticipated. Want to give a brief update on the budget, which I believe is good news. You'll recall we started this with a drought contingency fund loan of $1.1 million. We bid the project, hired Subterra Construction for $890,000, which came in at a good price. Two things that you probably didn't see or weren't aware of, we hired an inspector to be out there full time. This was such a project of such a large scale and magnitude that it was to the town's benefit to have an experienced inspector on site for the duration of the project. So we had somebody out there every day watching them. Don Moore and I consulted with that inspector, but he was our eyes and ears in the field daily. In addition to that, we also hired Geocon, which is a soil engineering company, to do compaction testing on the work that was occurring. And the reason we do that is to make sure that the water contractor compacts the trenches very well and meets specifications, so when the paving project comes on, those trenches don't collapse and show themselves anytime soon. So it was all money well spent. We did have some change orders through the project. There were 2 or 3 that were town initiated change orders related to some pieces of additional pipe. We did add some fire hydrant work and some storm drain work, and it's important to note that the fire hydrant work and the storm drain work are being paid for out of a separate funding source than the drought contingency fund loan. So we got some work done and it didn't affect our overall budget. And then we did work well with the contractor, and we ended up developing a value engineering credit. So we worked together and developed a way to repair the trenches that wasn't as expensive as it was originally proposed in the plan, and we got a value engineering credit back for that. So we did get some money back for that. So right now we're anticipating just under $70,000 balance remaining that could return to the drought contingency fund. Next slide, please. So that's the end of the end summary of the water project. Now the paving project is the next step. The way we planned this and the way it worked out is Washington Park Paving was going to be our annual Measure T Streets paving project. So the Measure T Streets money is a countywide sales tax measure that funds street improvement, street repairs throughout the county. We get a portion of that. That was money that we spent last year on the Oak Circle project, for example. And the process that we use is we hire a company to design. The company's name is Pavement Engineering, Inc. They design and prepare the plans and specifications for the project. They developed the engineer's estimate, which was $412,000 for this project. We bid it. We received competitive bids, so council awarded the contract to a company called Always Paving, Inc. on October 6th. That contract is in place. The notice to proceed is pending the status of the water project and now the weather. Next slide, please. So the scope of work for the paving project is consistent with what we did in Oak Circle. We edge grind and overlay the street portion of the street. And there's no work that occurs on the rolled curbs and the parking strips in the case of Washington Park, or if it was a street that had traditional curb and gutter, no work would be curb, gutter, and sidewalk. No work would be occurring on the curb, gutter, and sidewalk. Next slide, please. And a little clarification on why that is. We've gotten a lot of questions as this water project proceeded about what was going to happen or what might happen with the parking strips. So a little bit of clarification here. The Yountville Municipal Code defines the sidewalk area and or parking strips as that portion of the traveled way outside of the street but adjacent to the homeowner's property. It also defines that the owner of a parcel which abuts on any portion of a street, that the sidewalk area is theirs to repair and maintain. So as such, we're not including that work in our capital improvement project because the responsibility and the liability falls to the adjacent property owner. That said, when residents have been calling us and asking this question, we've been providing them with the name of the contractor that we've hired to do the work on the streets, and they are welcome to negotiate their own contract with that company to do work in front of their house. And I'm of the understanding that several property owners have reached out and done that, and Harold Hudson of Always Paving Inc. has been providing them with prices to do the portion of the parking strip in front of their individual house. Next slide, please. So now the next big question is, when are you going to pave the streets? So to get a quality street paving project, it's very temperature dependent. So asphalt, when it's delivered, when it's made in a plant and delivered, it's very hot. It's in the range of 300 degrees, but it's temperature dependent to spread it and get it in place at certain temperatures. So if it's too cold, you get a negative effect of the asphalt not binding properly, which causes the surface to ravel, which gives you that gravel effect. It also makes the finished product much more brittle. It's prone to chips and cracks and damage. So the end result that is asphalt placed that's not placed correctly in cold weather equals a poor final project. So what we're seeking is two types of temperatures, both ground and ambient, that are ideally 50 degrees and rising. So we had hoped to squeeze this project in at the end of the year. The water project pushed us into January now. So ideally, paving is mostly suitable for spring, summer, and fall. However, as we all experience, in January, February, and March, we do have moments or weeks of ideal ground and ambient temperature. So we've worked with our contractor, and he's prepared, as we are, to watch the weather. And if the opportunity presents itself in January, February, or March, we will move in and pave during that time. If not, if we get rain, which we hope that we will, then ultimately we'll pave in springtime, which means April. And okay, next slide, please. So when that 3-week opportunity does present itself, the order of work that you will experience or the neighbors will experience is approximately 1 week where the contractor comes in and quote unquote lowers the iron. So if you drive around and you see all those metal lids in the street, those are hard to pave around. So what they do is they lower them, they dig them up and they lower them, they pave over them, and then ultimately they come back and raise them later. The other thing that you'll experience out there is spot repairs. If you've driven or walked around the intersection of Jasmine and Landy, the road is in terrible condition because of the water failure that we had. The contractor, rather than just pave over it, we have to come in and do a dig out and ultimately repair the bigger area so then we can have a good paving surface on top of it. And then finally they edge grind. So where the gutters meet the street, they grind the same depth of asphalt that they're going to place. So it's all a smooth transition when we're done. So week 1, they'll lower the iron, they'll do the spots repairs, and then they'll grind. Week 2, they'll place the hot mix asphalt. And then week 3, they come back and raise the iron and then place all the traffic markings, the stop signs, the stop legends, and those things. Impacts to the residents during that time. The contractor, we write into our contract that they have to maintain access within reason throughout the duration of the project. With the nature of a paving project is, if the grinding machine is passing in front of a driveway, obviously access to and from that driveway is limited during that time, similar to the paving machine. Generally on the day of paving, we'll have no parking or driving on the day of the asphalt placement. But if a street gets paved in one day, it's usually open by that evening and people can drive on it that evening and the next day. And our goal is to provide notice consistent with what we thought was fairly good noticing for the water project. So our goal is to maintain a high level of communication with the neighbors so everybody knows what's going on. We experienced with the water project, lots of people concerned about service schedules for landscapers or deliveries. and we do our best to try to accommodate those as the project proceeds. Next slide, please. And with that, I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. Questions about this particular project and report? I will go ahead and say, you know, I had in my note to ask about Jasmine Landy. You just addressed it, because that is a terrible condition, and I knew that there was an answer for it, and I'm glad you explained that, because it is it's kind of a mess of an intersection still. But clearly, the water project was able to proceed with really positive weather,
Yes.
and you mentioned it, but I'll add to the great management and oversight that you and Don in particular and Joe gave on top of their paid management and oversight. Really was very helpful, and it certainly wasn't just, you know, the one time I happened to go out and have a question of the contractor, but you know, you did a great job of making sure they did a very good job being responsible with notifying neighbors so that we could get vehicles out of the area. And yes, we still had deliveries. There were still landscape services that were able to get in. A few, you know, glitches here and there, because that's going to happen, and it'll happen again when we do the repaving. But a really pretty mild to moderate impact. So, and I'm sure we'll hear some complaints about the grinding, because that's not quiet. But we're also talking about how long are we talking about? Decades long surface once it's all finished?
Oh, a new street paved in this manner is a 25-year to 35 to 50-year life.
Yeah.
And that was our goal, was to get the water project done in advance of that, so we had a great finished surface that doesn't need to be touched for a long time.
Absolutely. So yeah, I can certainly vouch for it for my part of Forester Lane. So thank you very much for all that. Really, I think there were some very smart decisions made about having the additional contractors there and the specialists monitoring, like that trench refilling. You identified an issue right away. That could have been a real problem if we had failed to identify that compaction issue. You got it like day one, it happened, and it didn't happen again. So that was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate that report. Thank you, and thanks for dressing up, making me look sloppy here with no tie on.
Absolutely.
But
thank you.
That's all right. Let's see. Trying to get my other screen going again. We have an update from our attorney next on what was a pretty wacky 2020 legislative year.
Yes, it was. Also be talking about fire hydrants, although in a slightly different context. Next slide. All right, so as the mayor mentioned, this was a strange year for the legislature, as it was for all of us. They didn't escape the oddity of this year. 2,200 bills were introduced. The legislature had a much slower year this year than they normally did. I think, as you know, every year we look at the bills that the legislature has passed, the ones that affect local government. We go through those, look at the ones that require changes to the municipal code or policies or some other aspects of town operations. Those turn into memos and working with staff. They sometimes turn into ordinances that you see in front of you at a future meeting. And this is an overview of bills that I think are particularly interesting for the town or have a particular impact for the town that is noteworthy. So 428 were submitted to Governor compared to 1,200 in 2019. So that just gives you a comparison of how many made it to his desk. Signed 372 of them, which is a whole bunch compared to how many were submitted to him, which means they really focused on the ones they thought were going to get signed or worked with the governor's office to get him there. Next. And a lot of them died in committee, mostly because there were other priorities this year, as you can imagine. Next slide. A lot of these are going to come back. All right, so the first one is on entitlement extensions, and the legislature does this each time there's a recession or an economic downturn. They will usually freeze in place certain land use and development entitlements and extend them for a period of time. Sometimes it's 18 months, sometimes it's 2 years. Maps in particular are subject to that, and they are again under this bill. After the 2008 recession, subdivision maps were extended for 2 years under a series of statutes, and this bill does a similar thing, only it's more expansive. So this applies to discretionary approvals, permits, and other entitlement that is subject to the Permit Streamlining Act and required for a housing development project. So these are things like variances, use permits, design review permits, but it also applies to ministerial approvals. This is a sort of unique aspect of it, and perhaps a reflection of the ADU law, which requires ministerial approval for ADUs instead of discretionary approval. So it also applies to ministerial approvals, permits, or entitlements required as a prereq for the issuance of a building permit. So you should just read ADU and you see that second bullet point there. It includes maps, tentative besting and parcel maps, residential development, and a mixed-use development with at least 2/3 of square footage designated for residential use. So what does the bill do? For all of those that are included within that very expansive definition you see in front of you, it extends the expiration date by 18 months automatically if it would otherwise expire between March 4th, 2020 and December 31, 2021 through the end of this year. And that gives the folks who have already received approval in one aspect or another to have some more time to complete the project, given funding without the permit expiring and them having to restart the process, which can be costly and time consuming. Next slide. So this bill has to do with religious institution affiliated housing projects. This applies to parcels, a single parcel or also multiple parcels that are contiguous with each other that are owned by a religious institution. If one of those parcels is being developed for housing and they propose to eliminate religious institution parking, that is to say the parking spaces that are associated with that religious use, the town cannot require replacement of that parking if the parking is going to the development that is occurring on a contiguous parcel of the same parcel. So that might occur if there are similar parcels or religious institution parking in town. There are some limitations on that. You can't require them to cure a deficit either. In other words, if there's a legal non-conforming use for that church and they have half as many parking spaces as they'd otherwise be required, or even just one less, can't require them to bring it up otherwise through this process either. The reduction can't be below 1 space per unit though. So you still need to have 1 space per housing development that's going in. And that's unique to religious institutions. Next slide. Here's our discussion on fire hydrants. For those of you who you might recall from the last Prop 218 update to water rates here, it's very common to include the cost of fire hydrants and the cost of providing water service. The thinking being, if you have a fire hydrant near your home, that is water service to your home. Clearly that fire hydrant serves the homes that are around it. The engineer's report that's provided when you update water rates goes into analysis of how that cost is allocated and calculated per home. And most jurisdictions include it in the cost of providing the service. Prop 218 says you cannot charge them for services that are provided to the general public. It has to be a property related fee, can't exceed the cost of providing the service to the home. So there is litigation currently arguing that fire hydrants are a general service to the public and not to the home in particular. And so the legislature has waded into this debate and they've adopted a bill that says no, water is within Prop 218, meaning it is a service that's provided to those homes. They are saying in the bill this is declarative of existing law, and as I said, this is part of the ongoing litigation that's going on in this area right now. But for now, and based on this bill, until a court says otherwise, fire hydrants are properly included. The cost of them is properly included within the cost of providing service. Next slide. Cannabis. I think just having gone through this, we're very aware of the excise tax and also the cultivation tax that applies to this, those being high. We discussed this at various points over the last couple of years. So this bill prohibits CDTFA from adjusting the state excise tax 15% upward until July 1, 2021, so about 6 months from now, and also the cultivation tax. In addition, local governments that ban cultivation and the sale are ineligible for grants for law enforcement, fire protection, and other costs related to implementation of the act. Next slide. This has to do with Lime scooters, for those of you, and most of us aren't traveling right now, but these shared mobility service providers, as they're called under state law, it requires them to obtain a permit or enter into an agreement with the jurisdiction where it operates and maintain liability insurance. So if a local jurisdiction like town decides to authorize shared mobility devices in the future, it must adopt operation, parking, and maintenance rules by an ordinance, agreement, or permit, including terms and conditions in those permits. So there's more regulation going in. I think all of you have heard the stories of Lime showing up in cities and dropping off 3,000 of these and just seeing how it goes. And this is the state law that says you can't do that anymore. You have to have an agreement in place, and the local jurisdiction has to regulate it through some kind of permitting or ordinance process. Next slide. A new statewide primary election date. I think most of you followed the presidential election. The primary was moved intentionally to give California a bigger impact in that process. That's now continuing. So there will be an earlier primary date in years where we have presidential elections. So on those 4 years in even number years, and then it will go back to the other date in the non-presidential election. So we're still going to maintain that early date for the presidential election, but not necessarily for every primary. And that's relevant to the town for placing measures on the ballot. Sometimes you can do that at a special election under certain circumstances. And if you were consolidating a special election, you would otherwise having to fill a seat or for some other purpose. Next slide. All right, COVID relief for workers. There are a couple bills here, and the town has been very up to date on policies that implement both of these already. Requires employers to notify state and local health departments, requires employers to notify of COVID-19 exposure, and creates rebuttable consumption under the workers' compensation laws. These have already been implemented by the town. Next slide. So the ABC test, I think we covered this when it was codified by the state legislature. It's a very simplified test for when a worker is an employee or an independent contractor, which of course changes things like tax deduction, wages, workers' comp, liability, a lot of other things under law. The legislature moved to the ABC test, commonly known as AB5, and that shook up this whole world and made a lot of organizations have to take a close look at whether or not it's truly an independent contractor or an employee instead. They've modified this slowly. There are lots of exceptions in AB5 to when that new simplified test doesn't apply. There's what's called the Barilla test, and that test is a case law that's been around. It's a 13-part test. I'm not going to go through all of them, but it is more favorable to finding independent contractor status than the ABC test, which is only a 3-part simplified test. So what did this bill do? It said that the older 13-part test applies to business contracts between public agencies like the town and sole proprietors, partnerships, LLCs, etc. So when the town is contracting directly with these companies, it's the older test, which is more likely to find an independent contractor status that applies, and not the ABC test. That's a new exception to AB5. Next slide. The Brown Act and social media. This bill did 2 primary things. The first one, it authorizes use of internet-based social media platforms to communicate with residents. When I saw that in the bill, I was surprised. I don't think anybody was confused about legislative body members being able to communicate with residents through social media. Now in the law, it says that you can do that. They decided to put that in there. If it's just one of you doing it, there's obviously not a quorum, so the Brown Act shouldn't be implemented. At any rate, it now says you can do what I think everyone always assumed you could do. But it has another provision in there which is unique, and I think the first time that this has happened in the Brown Act, I think is worth noticing. It prevents members of a legislative body, including all of those that, here in the town, from responding directly to any communication on the platform posted by another member of the legislative body if it has to do with the subject matter jurisdiction of the local agency. So that, for the first time, only involves 2 members of the legislative body. So you recall under the Brown Act, typically it requires a quorum, 3 either directly in the same place or through a series of communications. This applies to 2. That's a new restriction in the Brown Act that was surprising when it came out. It is law now. It applies specifically to social media platforms though. Next slide. So this bill streamlines applications for housing grants. Previously, different housing grants were housed in different state agencies and run in different ways by different folks. This combines them all into a single place. So presumably, or I should say the intent, is to streamline this process and make it easier to apply for and receive housing grants. They're all now located in one place and streamlines it. I don't recall the department it's been headed to, but they are now in the same place. And worth noting, if the town is interested in applying for housing grants, that there's a new process and they're all under one roof now. Next slide. This is a change to the density bonus law, and I know the town is going through the Zoto update right now, and so this might be part of that discussion as well. It does a couple things to the density bonus law to incentivize additional affordable housing and to give more units to developers who choose to do that. The percentages are, instead of a 35% density bonus, it's now 50. And in calculating the number of units, you now include the density bonus units in the total overall calculation as well. That used to be an after the fact. You couldn't add that into your initial calculation. You do now. So you assume what would the total units be if the density bonus was granted. That's the number you use for calculating percentages and whether or not you qualify for different incentives and commissions under the law. Will require an update to the density bonus ordinance of the town. And like I said, that can be done during the Zoto update as well. Next slide. Moratorium on evictions. This is a bill that puts into place what the governor had done through executive order, prohibits eviction due to COVID-19 hardship. It does have some requirements and safe harbors in it. It requires payment of at least 25% of rent from September 2020 through January 2021 to avoid eviction. Landlord can also still collect through small claims court. Next slide. Mandatory family leave. This is another aspect of the town's policies that have already been updated based on this new law. But it now changes what employers need to comply with this family leave requirement. It used to be employers with 50 employees or more. It now includes employers with 5. Next slide. So this was signed in 2019, and the reason why we're revisiting this, even though we discussed it last year, is you probably recall this has to do with objective design standards and the town's ability to adopt new ones after January 1, 2020, and the ability to expand existing ones into different zones or different types of projects. When this bill was passed and signed in October of 2019, I think we all reasonably assumed that the town would be included within the definition of an affected city. Under the law, it has to do with an urbanized cluster or an urban area as designated by the United States Census Bureau. We looked at that data and thought, yes, town will be included in this. That was the operating assumption going into 2020. HCD adopted a list and did their own analysis, and the town is not on that list. Every other city in Napa County is. The town is the only one who's accepted from this requirement right now. And I say right now because after the 2020 census, the law directs HCD to do the analysis again. And as you know, that process is almost over. So HCD will go through this process soon. They will reissue a list and the town will either be on it or not. Right now you're not, meaning that you can still adopt subjective design standards and they can still be extended into new zones, into new types of projects. I know that was a concern in the Zoto update, and the housing crisis, this aspect of the Housing Crisis Act of 2019 does not currently apply to the town because of HCD's determination about the town's status as an urbanized cluster under the United States Census Bureau designations. And next slide. And then of course, it wouldn't be a discussion of legislation if we talked about the other form of legislation this year, the executive order. So I won't go through all of these, but there were many. I think if you recall, starting in March and continuing and still to this day, lots of executive orders that do a lot of different things. having to do with town operations, extending the deadline to file claims against the town, obviously the Brown Act and teleconferencing, as we are doing here this evening, and a few others. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions about the bills that are here.
Thanks. I have two quick questions myself, and then I'll invite others. The eviction is at 3088, I think. That's residential only, correct?
I believe so, yes.
And SB 330, you just touched on the design standards. If there was a project that was approved while we're not on the list and have that flexibility still, and it's not completed in the future before they make a change, would it be retroactive? Like, could they stop a project before groundbreaking and say you now have to abide by the new restrictive standards?
No. So this would, if the project was already approved during a time frame when they were in effect and it was ready to go forward, then no. And they would have a vested right to continue that project going forward under that process. And so, and it also only pauses the subjective standards that were in effect prior to January 1, 2020. So if there were ones that were already in effect, as is the case in the town, those would continue to apply to those same types of projects. You can't deny projects either based on certain projects based on subjective design standards either. That's not the Housing Crisis Act of 2019. That's the Housing Accountability Act, which was a 2 years earlier bill. And if there are multiple units being proposed, residential units, then the town cannot deny that for anything other than objective reasons or health and safety reasons. So it really depends on the type of project that's being proposed, how many units are being proposed, and whether or not it's in a zone or the type of project that has subjective design standards that would have applied prior to January 1, 2020. This is an area of the law that the legislature has made very confusing for all of us. Right? And so as we're all trying to wade through this, it becomes a sort of let's get on the phone, review the application, figure out what they're actually asking to do. It's a case-by-case analysis to try to figure out whether or not these things apply.
Well, I don't know if it's going to affect the conversation Sandra and the Vice Mayor and I will be a part of with our Zoto update meeting on Thursday, but we'll see.
Yep.
All right, Councilmember Moeller, question?
Yes, I'm going to go back to fire hydrants. What an interesting thing that somebody had to figure out. I don't really know why. So what that means is that when we do water rates, that now we have to factor in terms of our capital, any possible new fire hydrants we're going to put in, as well as flushing of fire hydrants, and that's all going to be in our water special fund, and it's going to be subject to Prop 218. Am I interpreting that correct?
So what the bill says is that fire hydrants are part of the cost of providing water service to homes. And it says that that's what the current law is. And so whether or not the town chooses to include that as part of its water rate analysis before it adopts rates, I'll have to defer to Steve and perhaps Celia whether or not that was done this last time around. But it's certainly, what the bill says is that is a properly included cost in the cost of providing services to homes. You don't have to include it because of course Prop 218 says you just can't charge more than the cost. So you can charge less. But that's, the bill is declarative of existing law. And like I said, it's the legislature wading into litigation, basically, because this is the central issue in some contested cases right now. And it's the legislature's way of saying, well, hold on, this is what we think it means, so that the courts might pick up on that and choose to run with it.
So if we don't put it within our water rates and we have to replace our fire hydrants, they're subject to a Prop 218 protest notice.
Well, if you are charging the cost to the individual property owners, yes. And similarly, if you were rolling the cost of the fire hydrants into the cost of providing water service to the individual accounts, then that would be part of the Prop 218 process necessarily.
pay for them out of general fund, then it's not subject to Prop 218 noticing.
Correct, because you're not
Okay.
charging the fee. Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Mhm.
Any other questions? I don't see any other hands raised. Might be the late hour.
No problem.
Gary, thank you very much. Really good clarifications on a very challenging legislative year, for sure. And as you pointed out, a lot of what was suspended in committee is already coming back. So it's going to be as limited as it was last year. It's probably going to be that much more volatile this year.
Yep.
So we'll see. Okay, thank you. Council meeting reports. I've got several. I'm going to be very quick as I can. Napa County Flood Control, Water Conservation, because I think I have a couple to catch up. We did bid a fond farewell to now former Mayor Jill Teckle for her many, many years of service on flood control, as well as others, Napa Valley Transportation Authority and others. But she's really, one part of her legacy is the flood control project in downtown Napa. Also today, we had another flood control meeting. We heard a presentation by the San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission, BCDC, regarding their Adapting to Rising Tides program. So basically it's sea level rise in the Bay Area and how it will reach us in Napa County. League of California Cities update, just very cursory review. We had League Leaders Forums in early December, a board meeting in December where we adopted our 2021 strategic priorities, funding for local COVID-19 public health response and economic recovery, funding for housing and homelessness, improve state local planning to strengthen community disaster preparedness, resiliency, and recovery, and that includes climate change, and protect and modernize critical infrastructure, which includes broadband deployment and public transit. There was other league activity, including with the North Bay Division, but this is the speed version of my reports. County Climate Action Committee, Councilmember Dornbecker and I on that committee met early December. We did discuss formalizing a structure, some kind of memorandum of understanding. And so that is ongoing. We may be having a meeting. We have a meeting of that committee the 22nd of this month, where that conversation will continue. And we may be bringing a proposal to the council the following or in the near term meeting to present and get feedback from all of you that we can bring back to that committee. Let's see, on January 11th, which is next Monday, it'll be the first meeting of the new countywide standing committee. So I guess, Michelle, you can add that to my list. All the mayors and the chair of the Board of Supervisors are making up the standing committee, the Napa Economic Recovery Work Group. Hold off on that official title, Michelle, it may change. But we will be focusing on economic recovery strategies and information sharing to help with our economic impacts of not only the pandemic, but the severe wildfire season that happened this year. Also, I've been on for the last 6 weeks or so, numerous phone calls with mostly restaurateurs, but also tasting room operators and other retailers, sometimes with our chambers of commerce, discussing the status of the Bay Area stay-at-home order / lockdown and how we can best prepare all of our businesses for when we do in fact see a recovery on the horizon or reopening on the horizon. I did want to share very quickly at request of a member of the council, some of the updates on the vaccine distribution status in Napa County. It has begun at the Veterans Home, and that is, just heard an update today from Dr. Reluccio, who is our County Public Health Officer. She attributed the testing that's happening of some of the residents, mostly in the higher risk critical care skilled nursing area, but also some of the caregivers. That is apparently happening through the federal pharmacy partnership program. So they are actually using, in some cases, pharmacy personnel to administer the vaccines directly to residents in those high-risk skilled nursing facilities like the Veterans Home. That is also rolling out throughout Napa County. It's being handled as a separate independent distribution of the vaccine from the county public health vaccine distribution. As it was described today, they take a portion off the top of the distribution and they take it directly to some of those critical care patients and caregivers. There is a pharmacy partnership with CVS and Walgreens. Eventually, that is going to be rolling out at a broader scale for potentially members of our community, especially, I would say, because we don't have the large long-term care facilities like, say, the city of Napa does, but it may apply in our senior mobile home parks, for example, our Adventist community, for example. Those are still being determined exactly which populations are going to be in what sequence. The best recommendation I can give you is to go to Napa County's website, countyofnapa.org. They do have a very good and clear as it can be, explanation of the vaccine distribution process. It is full of phases and full of tiers in those phases. So yes, it is hard to find where each of us falls in those categories, but it is there. It might take a little looking, but it's not purely based on age. It's not purely based on medical condition. Many factors are being merged together in some cases. We are expecting additional healthcare workers to get the next amounts of doses that are available. There's also an ongoing discussion about whether, when, for just a hypothetical, if Napa County gets 11,000 doses, are they going to go to 11,000 people, or are they going to go to half the people and they hold those doses for the second round 3 weeks or so later? That's still being discussed at the county level and at the state level, the best way to do that. So again, countyofnapa.org, they update that as often as they get new information and guidance from the state and the public health officer. So that's an update there. Are there any other meeting updates from anyone else? Looking for hands. Not seeing any. Okay. Very quickly, the last things that I had, where did my, here we go. Can't get this thing to work. Here we go. Reports and announcements. Just talked about the new county working group. Also, Congressman Thompson held a small business administration webinar today, had over 500 people attending. And it was about the economic impacts of the coronavirus. That information he has made available through his social media and on his website. So I would suggest you go checking out Congressman Thompson's platforms. It's helpful information for our small business community. And I want to suggest something for future consideration by the council. And it relates to our mobile food vendors and how we have managed them in town. I'll start off by saying I want to respect the hardships that our brick and mortar restaurants in particular have gone through. And I'm not looking to add an additional competition as they are trying to come back online and recover. But what I will say is I want to acknowledge that some of our residents have expressed their appreciation that we have allowed the one mobile vendor to continue operating up at Yountville Community Park, even though it's under normal circumstances, it would not be allowed parked on a public street and operating out of the park. But it's something that we may want to look at as we get further into the economic reopening, if we want to consider offering one, maybe there's one at the south end of town by, operating out of Veterans Memorial Park that gives a second option at the opposite end of town, just as an example of providing some easy, low-cost mobile food options. Again, very sensitive to not impacting our restaurants that are suffering severely. Just throw that idea out there as how we can potentially be creative in our business sectors. Those are all the things I have to say tonight. Steve, I see you unmuted.
Well, I just want to say with regard, this is a good example under council comments. If there's a consensus direction from the council to your mobile food vendor review, my suggestion would be that Samantha, Sandra, and I will meet, work on some concepts, and then bring you back. And it may take us several weeks because we do have a little bit in the planning queue, but we may be able to bring you back some thoughts and some draft elements for you to further, because I will echo the comments that you're sharing, Mayor, that I have heard from residents that are appreciative of the businesses that are pivoted, as I know that's one of the Lake Superior State University words to banish, but they are appreciative of the businesses that have pivoted to allow to go, and the fact that the mobile food vendor, we did have a second one at one point in time that was at ad hoc when they weren't seasonally open. So I do think Sam and I can take a look with Sandra about how to do that. Certainly, the area at Yountville Community Park was set up with Focus and the barbecue and Yountville Days, so we have facilities there to support it. And we can take a look at, you mentioned the south side as well. So if there's consensus direction, that is the one I'm going to process again. That is the process requirement. Then we will bring that back to you for further discussion at a later date.
And I want to. Yeah, thank you. I just want to stress this is not an urgent issue. I absolutely want to stay focused on getting our restaurants back operating as quickly as possible. We assume it's going to phase back in with outdoor service at some percentage, but that needs to be continue to be our priority. But as we transition even further, and we'd like to believe that as the vaccine rolls out, we're going to see a more rapid recovery of the economy. If that plays out, then this kind of a creative option might be something that we can offer. So I'm not proposing that we put any staff time on it right away. It was just really in response to some of the feedback, since it's kind of the only place you can, other than a few of our places that are able to do to go right now, we have very few food options. And so that's probably why it seems to be a little more prominent that the mobile vendor is operating.
Consensus. We've already talked about it. It will be into March before we would be bringing this, but I do think, we have some things make more sense than we can start. So not everything is, but I do think I hear you, because Sandra has a busy January, February on the planning queue as it is, but I do think there's some opportunity, again, if there's council interest in this.
Right, and maybe just provide feedback directly to Steve on that, because it's not, like I said, not time sensitive right now. And we're, the Vice Mayor and I are probably going to load up a bunch more stuff on Sandra's plate at our Zoto review meeting on Thursday. So this won't be another one I want to add to that list right away.
Well, we do have the opportunity to diversify. I still occasionally like to work on a real project too. So we know how to divide and help support as we move forward, because I do think there's merit to this conversation and bringing it back.
Great, thank you.
I hate to say it, but my battery is about to die.
Okay, and we're trying to wrap up right now. Vice Mayor, your hand is raised, and then we're going to try to adjourn.
Thank you. I also was on Congressman Thompson's webinar today, and I just wanted to give the website in case anyone's listening, sba.gov. Well, to the people who are listening, sba.gov/disaster. That will take you to, you can stack COVID relief and wildfire disaster relief. And so that website will take you to both of those opportunities. And it was really, I recommend that you go to the Congressman's Facebook page and watch it. Even if you're a sole proprietor, an NPO, an outdoor venue, they have a lot of good info.
And they're expecting more guidance coming out of federal government by the end of this week. There are some
Right.
questions they could not yet answer. I know at the late hour, unless there's something urgent, timely, I believe we've taken care of our business for today. No closed session. I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Actually, I'm just going to adjourn us to our next regular meeting, which will be 6 p.m. See?
Perfect timing.
6 o'clock Tuesday, January 19th is our next regular meeting. We're going to adjourn until then. So thank you all very much. Councilmember Dornbecker, we made it before your battery ran out.
I've got 6% left.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Well,
girl,
I
that's
don't-
an age.
I don't think I do. So we're going to get out of here. Thank you all very
Thanks
much.
all.
Bye.
Bye.
Adjourned.
Good night. Good night.
Night.